to call our meeting to order, 6:12 p.m. Let's start off with a roll call. Claudia, please.
Dr. Armstrong Romero,
Here.
Director Cox,
Here.
Director Gerken,
Here.
Director Ivy,
Present.
Director Mason,
Here.
Director Ortiz,
Present.
Director Reinhardt.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. At this time, I'd like to take a moment to welcome everyone to our board meeting this month. I'm very happy to see my colleagues in person, and for those of you joining us virtually, I'm very thankful that you're joining us virtually. So our meetings are held in person and online for public viewing, and so if you'd like to join us in person, we do have capacity limits. So those limits are posted at our front door, so only a certain number of people can come on in and join us live. Hopefully that won't last for long, but it's right now. So other than that, you can join us virtually, and we're happy to have you. So you can also visit our boe.aurorak12.org/guidelines to see what our capacity guidelines are to attend in-person board meetings. So we are now on to the opportunity for audience, and just a quick clarification, board. Before we were doing, I believe it was 10 slots, because that was the capacity for in-person, and however that carried over to virtual, but that has changed, will change moving forward. So obviously there will still be an in-person capacity, but not a capacity for virtual. So that was my oversight, and so my apologies for that. With that being said, we have 11 speakers this evening. Each speaker will get 3 minutes to address the board, and we have 3 speakers who are in person and 8 who are virtual, and the topics are varied. So we're going to start off with in-person, and first up we have Valerie Richmond. The topic is disproportionate disciplining of Black students. And let's give Valerie a moment to cross on over. Welcome, Valerie. So thank you so much for joining us. Please state your name for the record. You will have 3 minutes to speak to the board, and we're so excited to have you.
Thank you for having me here today.
And please speak directly into the microphone with masks. It's really hard to hear.
Yes. Please excuse my delay a little bit with the mask on. Hello, good evening. My name is Valerie Richmond, and I am a family leader at RISE. I am encouraged by the relationships being built in our coalitions. As a mom of 4, a first-generation college student, an educator, a doctoral student, and a woman of color, I am a part of the change that centers the voices of families most impacted by inequalities. I am here as a member of the Black Alliance for Education Equity Coalition, or BAE, at RISE. My words today are in solidarity with BAE's mission to eliminate the disproportionate behavioral incidences of our Black students and are validated by the experiences of our families. So, how do APS students and families shape successful futures? Per APS's strategic plan, it takes vision, purpose, and a plan, along with partnerships among APS staff, families, and our community. Based on APS's 2020 Community Core Beliefs about Education, RISE seeks to expand conversations and applicable outcomes to such goals as every student has unique abilities that we must recognize and engage, as well as the goals of shared responsibility for student achievement between students, families, staff, and community members. As to the foundation of these goals, a true partnership seeks for all students to have equitable access to learning opportunities, technology, and environments that support them in reaching their full potential. Bay at Rise welcomes a collaborative partnership that provides vital resources and opportunities for students and families, showcasing that diversity is a strength in our community. APS's behavioral support system for student success states that one of its goals is to work on partnerships that support structures in our school communities, highlighting the closure of the behavioral incident gap of our Black students. Based on human resource data provided by APS in 2019 and 2021 DAC information, our Black male and female students present the most notable representation in referrals, suspensions, and expulsions, representing about 25% of the incidences while only accounting for 17% of the APS population. Bay formally requests APS to ensure that equitable restorative efforts are representative of all voices, including students, educators, and administrators, through measures that include peer-to-peer mentorship and resources, like the newly implemented PBIS program. Restorative justice and implicit bias professional development training should be provided for all APS staff who interact with students. Bay at Rise believes that these actions align with the district's mission, which is, in partnership with our community, the ability to accelerate the learning of all students to develop knowledge, skills, and character necessary to shape successful futures. Bay at Rise invites the board to co-create the next steps of the educational justice process together. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today, and we look forward to working with you and your partnership in our efforts.
Thank you so much, Valerie.
Thank you.
The next speaker we have is Tamika Coleman, who will also be speaking with us about disproportionate disciplining of Black students. Tamika, welcome. Please state your name for the record. You will have 3 minutes to address the board.
Okay, thank you, Tamika Coleman. Hi, my name is Tamika Coleman, and I am a RISE family leader with the Black Alliance for Education Equity Coalition, also known as BAE. We are seeking to end the disproportionate disciplinary rate for Black students within APS. For me and other Black families, the disparities are very real. I have had conversations with my heartbroken 8-year-old because of racially charged interactions she's had with her teacher. I've endured the disappointment from the final solution that administration has systematically, robotically, and quickly deemed for my child's inequities. You see, I have cried many tears, felt defeated, even summed myself up as simply being a powerless Black mother. I've had to deal with the challenges of working a full-time job, helping my child academically, and still having to invest more time in repairing the relationship she has with her teacher, because as her mother, I know that it is inextricably linked to her failing grades. My daughter once adopted the idea that she possessed an attitude that is sassy, rebellious, and worthy of punishment for simply being herself in the midst of a teacher that has no clue or understanding of Black culture. It made her give up on her studies and not want to try. She used to cry profusely before class in the morning while I was routinely being approached by her teacher with yet another subjective behavioral complaint. It has to stop. We need you to work with BAE to dissect the root cause of the disproportionate number of Black children being disciplined in APS. They are pulled out of the classroom and missing valuable instructional time. They are silently losing confidence in their abilities. Why? Because there are teachers and leaders that first of all refuse to even validate this as an issue, but also fail to see Black students as vulnerable children with unique needs. Instead, they treat them like fully grown Black men and women, expecting them to behave far beyond their years and age, and passing judgment on them in the drop of a dime. We must help all of our African American students truly feel like kids again, with the permission to make mistakes in their youth. They must receive equitable treatment, such as holistic healing, instead of continuously receiving punitive outcomes. I'm sorry. It starts with altering the mindset of all that they depend on in APS to help them grow. Then we must implement practical and measurable solutions that will change the way our Black children view and approach the world. Equity must be thoroughly defined so that it is exercised daily within the classroom with accountability measures in place. It is time for APS to not only listen to the voices of families, but work with them as allies when making decisions about their children. My daughter is now a former APS student. It is not fair that we, like many other families, must flee to find solace because we're tired of dropping off our kids to school, wondering if they will suffer yet another hit to their self-esteem. Aurora is our home, and every one of us have the right to stay here and be treated with respect and dignity. Therefore, I am inviting you, each one of you, to cohesively partner with BAE to fight for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker we have is Christy Cummings, unknown topic. Christy, welcome. You have 3 minutes to address the board. Please state your name for the record.
Christy Cummings.
Thank you.
Tonight, I'd like to speak to you from the perspective of a parent with a teenager. Reports from all areas of our district indicate that many middle school and high school students have had less than 10 days of in-person learning since March 12th of 2020. As we approach March 12th of 2021, we as parents of middle schoolers and high schoolers wonder if this will last just more than 1 year. Many students from kindergarten to seniors have suffered in innumerable ways. This ranges from being traumatized by losing internet access when other family members are also logged on, experiencing software glitches, headaches, suffering screen fatigue and eye problems, and daily meltdowns due to the general stress of remote learning. Teens in Colorado and across the nation are suffering. You probably remember the report from last month about teen suicides increasing at an alarming pace in Nevada. What was more alarming is that officials in the school district found an astounding number of internet searches on their Chromebook devices for "how do I kill myself?" This makes me wonder how many of our students have also searched for the same questions to be answered on our district Chromebooks. Furthermore, the city of San Francisco has filed suit against its district to reopen schools, citing a 66% increase in suicidal children taken to the ER. Another study, Challenge Success, an affiliate of Stanford Graduate School, surveyed more than 10,000 high school students. 84% of remote students reported exhaustion, headaches, insomnia, and other ailments. We definitely have our own concerns with teen mental health here in Colorado. Multiple suicides in the northeastern corner of Colorado garnered the attention of Governor Polis after being brought up by a student from Merino High School. Emergency department visits for suicide attempts have increased 31% from 2019 to 2020 in Boulder County. And teen suicide deaths increased sharply in El Paso County in 2020, with 15 deaths compared to 9 in 2019 and 7 in 2018. The effects of isolation are heightening this trend. The closure of schools and sports has forced students to stay confined to their homes, increasing the rates of anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts for people of this age group. The argument that kids are not being harmed by remote learning is just not true. For almost just 1 year, we have considered the adults' well-being in our communities over and to the exclusion of the well-being of our youth and our students. What civilized society expects its youth to protect the adults in the community? So I'm asking you, I checked today, our rates for Adams County were 101 per 100,000, and Arapahoe County 116 cases per 100,000. So we're almost to the blue zone. So I'm asking that you would consider making middle school and high school full-time. Jefferson County, some other school districts are starting March 1st. Let's not put it off till after spring break. Let's make it before just 1 year.
Thank you. That will conclude our in-person audience members, we are now on to virtual. The first speaker we have is Yolanda Calderon, and she will be discussing changes in in-person learning and changes in the calendar. Yolanda, welcome. Please state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes to address the board.
Just a second while I get loaded up. All right. Dr. Armstrong Romero, can you hear me all right?
I can.
All right. So my name is Yolanda Calderon, and I have to speak quickly. I want to talk about cohort learning and toxic positivity. Mr. Munn has talked about the presence of improved ventilation systems, but even Dr. Douglas recognized the buildings that he toured were newer, and he is certain that other buildings are not as well ventilated. He's right. I'm an elementary specialist. In the hybrid model, I'm exposed to 6 adults and 75 kids a day. In the 16 classrooms I have taught in, only a few of them can open their windows. But with winter weather, it's not a strategy that we can rely on. Mr. Munn continues to assert his belief that it is safe, insisting it's based on data. That data may reflect a safe environment for an isolated office, but presents a more threatening experience for those of us who are in closed spaces with 25 people eating breakfast and lunch unmasked. Now I'm going to be exposed to 6 adults and 150 kids every day. We do not exist in a bubble, and we need to calibrate our current mitigation strategies before we expose our staff and greater community, especially with the growing concerns and more contagious variants. I am frustrated, but not surprised at Mr. Munn's misrepresentation of AEA's role in decision-making. Communications between the association and APS have been extremely limited. Mr. Munn's assertion that plans from the fall have been voted on by AEA is inaccurate. The superintendent's listening sessions are leading at best and exclusionary at worst. I'm not convinced he wants honest feedback on what's happening in schools. Mr. Munn, and therefore the school board, have been collecting sound bites to motivate the furthering of his agenda. Compounding these very real concerns and issues with return to full capacity is the insistence on trivializing the mental health of its employees. In every PD session, we are being told that we need to make time for mindfulness and self-care, yet we are asked to invest more of ourselves with less resources and time. Unable to share objects, students must have their own sets of material, which demands that we make 3 times the amount of manipulatives to keep safe. With the understanding that this is one example of an increased workload, when exactly am I supposed to make time for self-care, especially if we're going to move away from asynchronous Friday? The attitude of gratitude response is a slap in the face to our very real concerns. I can be grateful that APS offers me insurance and frustrated with how cavalier APS is with my life. The culture of toxic positivity puts the onus on the teacher. The idea that one wellness course or downloading an app will wipe away our concerns is insulting, especially when not all the buildings are as updated as Mr. Munn claims. Teaching is exceptionally hard. 50% of the workforce leave before they complete 5 years of teaching. This culture shift in APS diminishes people's lived experiences and realities and will keep pushing people out of the profession. We should be encouraging teachers to seek balance in their life and make healthy boundaries around work, not adding to their to-do lists. The ramifications of this pandemic will be felt for years. Schools are closing. People are going to lose their job. APS should be supporting staff through transitions both professionally and personally with more than a pat on the back and have a positive attitude. The way to support our staff is to limit in-person learning until we have 80% vaccination and provide real mental health supports to their staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Yolanda. The next speaker we have is Savannah Mercev, and the topic is an unfortunate event that happened to my child. Savannah, please state your name for the record. Welcome to our meeting, and you have 3 minutes to address the board. Savannah, please unmute. Are you able to unmute your computer? She's asking if we have a phone that she can call, I believe, or maybe not. Yeah, maybe if you try to log off and rejoin, we can come back to you. Okay, so we'll add you last, okay? give you some time. All right, so we're going to go to Kimberly Brazil. Kimberly, this topic that you will be discussing with us this evening is inequities when switching to asynchronous Fridays. Thank you for joining us tonight. Please state your name for the record. You have 3 minutes to address the board.
Good evening, Kimberly Brazil.
Welcome.
Good evening, APS Board. My name is Kim Brazil. I'm a teacher at Rangeview, and I'd like to start by thanking you for your continued support of our community, our students, and the teachers in this district. Throughout the entire pandemic, I believe you as a board have to make some really tough decisions time and time again, and you've made them with the best interest of our students and our teachers in mind, and I very much appreciate it. Tonight, I am asking you to once again consider the very real impact of your decisions on our community. In the past couple of weeks, we've gotten some very mixed, confusing communications about what's going on with Fridays, asynchronous Fridays after spring break. And I'm here tonight to ask you to keep Fridays as is for the remainder of the year. Some of the reasons for this request are very specific to the needs of our high schools, so please consider us separately. For many of our high school students, they have had to work to help support their families during this crisis, and they work on Fridays and have for months. And honestly, they may have to continue to do so no matter what you guys decide to do. So cutting out asynchronous Fridays is not only an academic decision, but a financial one for many of our families. For teachers, Fridays are a vital part for planning quality instruction, and every single lesson has to be reworked with the changing environments. On Friday, we have time to meet with students one-on-one and to help support them in this difficult learning environment. We have time to grade and give quality feedback. Doing away with asynchronous Fridays creates some very big unintentional inequalities. At the high school level, we've broken each semester into 8 courses, and students only go to 2 classes at a time to keep them in tight cohorts. Should we do away with the asynchronous Fridays midway through the semester, students in session 5, which is already done, and 6, which they're in now, will have about 25% less access to direct instruction in content than the peers in later sessions. And they'll end up in the same classes with each other next year, but they have extremely inequitable access to the content that they're supposed to know. Doing away with asynchronous Fridays midway through the semester also creates some massive inequities among teachers. By contrast, teachers have the same amount of instructional and planning time as each other. Each semester, to get to 5 classes, high school teachers teach one double, both an AM and a PM class, with no real planning in between, and it averages out over the semester, so that's okay. But if we change in the middle, teachers of doubles in sessions 7 and 8 have far less plan time, more instructional time to plan for, and more content to assess and give feedback on, and 0 time to do it. And lastly, we've been told that part of the issue with Fridays is a lack of engagement as measured by attendance, but those don't tell the story. During the week, I have several kids in each class who log into class for a small fraction of time, engage in nothing, and have perfect attendance. But to get to credit for Friday, they have to log in and do something. So the difference in attendance is not a matter of Friday or not, it's a matter of output requirements. You're not comparing the same thing. COVID is creating some huge learning inequalities, and we probably shouldn't make them worse on purpose. Please keep Fridays as is. Thank you.
The next speaker is Kenyatta Robinson. The topic is bias effects on Black children and families. Kenyatta, welcome to our board meeting. Please state your name for the record. You will have 3 minutes to address the board.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kenyatta Robinson.
Welcome.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kenyatta Robinson. My children, ages 10, 13, and 14, all attended schools in APS. I'm also a RISE family leader and a member of FAID, the Black Alliance for Educational Equity. My children attended Vassar Elementary, where the principal, teachers, and staff were my village in helping to nurture and support my children. I'll talk about my 14-year-old son. He is respectful of himself and others, a good student, an athlete, and a teenage Black American. Like any other student his age, my son sometimes makes mistakes, but he accepts responsibility for his actions. In sixth grade at an APS middle school, my son was mocked because he talked fast, ganged up on emotionally, called a hooligan an idiot, told he wouldn't do well in a gifted school, and was deeply insulted by being told he used his intelligence as an advantage to get back at people aggressively, all done by some APS teachers and an administrator. I was so hurt when my son said, "Mommy, I have to get out of that school before everything I've worked so hard for in my life gets messed up." Please be mindful that came from the mind and mouth of a 12-year-old child. My son was accepted to an APS K through 8 school for gifted and talented children. Seventh grade begins. He was enjoying school and making new friends in what I believe to be a supportive environment. Things slowly began to change. My son was being sent to the office for things that were overlooked in other students. My son's reactions were maximized as other students' actions towards my son were minimized. Some of his white classmates recognized the differences in how he was treated as opposed to other non-Black students. And some would tell my son, "Be careful, bro, they're trying to get you." On field day 2019, my son was falsely accused of pushing a teacher, which my son has always denied. My son was exonerated because the video of the incident did not show my son pushing the teacher, but showed the teacher putting his hands on my son, which they labeled as incidental contact. My son was afraid and ran out of the school towards the neighboring high school to try to call me for help while some staff ran after him. Someone in the front office called APS police. My son told me when he saw the police coming towards him, he stopped running because he didn't want to get shot. My son was a 13-year-old Black child in America. The what ifs played over and over in my mind. Thank God my son wasn't physically harmed. Implicit bias, humiliation, double standards, and disproportionate disciplinary actions is what my son and many Black students suffer in APS. Fighting against these injustices, advocating for my son left me at times exhausted and afraid and alone. The weight of the fight against these injustices my family and I experienced is what led us away from APS. My family and I have been with RISE and BAY for 2 years working together on solutions to help enforce positive change for our Black children in APS. We're here tonight, and I'm asking you, will you all support RISE and BAY in fighting with us for respect and dignity for all our Black children within APS? Thank you, Superintendent Munn and the board, for your time.
Thank you. The next speaker we have is Linnea Reed Ellis, and the topic is in-person learning. Linnea, please state your name for the record, and welcome. You have 3 minutes to address the board.
All right, there I am. Good evening, board. It's good to see you. So let me just say, so thank you again for this opportunity to speak tonight. It's nice to see you back in person for your meetings, especially since teachers are now in buildings with full or half full classes daily. I'm here to speak once again about the importance of teacher and community voice in district decisions. You and the superintendent are making a lot of decisions right now. Some are for the short term, like how we phase back to in-person learning, and some are for the long term, like Blueprint. We teachers are the professionals on the ground. We are the people who interact with students on a daily basis. So I ask, why would you not want to hear our ideas for how to move this district forward? For the decision to return to in-person learning, which teachers were consulted about the timeline? My guess is none. As a third grade teacher, I'm both excited and nervous to have all the students in the room with me. What frustrates me most is the rapid turnaround time of this change. As a classroom teacher for 13 years, I can tell you that going from 8 kids in a room to 18 or more is a big shift. For example, there's more pencil bins to fill, water bottles that need names, and adapted lesson plans to write. An administrator who's never been a teacher does not think about these things. And I'm not saying that they're bad people trying to make my job harder. I'm saying they do not understand what I and other teachers do every day. So when decisions are being made that will affect how teachers work, we should be involved. When I think about Blueprint, I'm incredibly worried about the lack of community input in these decisions. I recognize Blueprint is a facilities plan for our district. And I know we are a district in flux with changing enrollment, and we have a lot of older buildings on the west side. I work in one of them. However, planning for our future cannot just be about facilities. School buildings are so much more than a piece of property. Last month, I listened to dozens of teachers and families from Peoria Elementary talk about the community they've built at their school. It brought tears to my eyes to hear what they had to say. Why was community value not considered when making plans for the future of Peoria? Why were these teachers and parents not asked what they would like to see for the future of their school and their neighborhood? Superintendent Munn will remind you of the dozens of presentations given to the school board about Blueprint, and I would like to point out a few important facts from those presentations. In December of 2018, there was a presentation that included survey results. A few numbers stuck out to me. First, 909 surveys were completed. This alone is just a small fraction of the APS community. Second, 862 of those were completed in English. That's 94% of surveys completed in English. That's not a true representation of the APS community. And another example of this information presented to you was about the specialization. So I was on the regional design team for Zone 1. I was in all the meetings with fellow educators and parents where we planned and envisioned our future. Then none of our ideas were brought to you. I'll repeat that, none. The regional specializations presented to you last spring did not come from the community. I'm not even sure where they came from. Maybe it was the LRFAC or the leadership team, not the general community. Over the last few months, I've spoken with hundreds of APS educators and dozens of family members. There are so many people invested in APS, like these parents from RISE who are speaking tonight. And in these conversations, I always wonder, why are they not the ones at the table and on the Zoom calls when decisions are being made? I hope you are asking the same questions of Superintendent Munn so that you will push for policy to include more genuine input from teachers going forward. Thank you for your time.
Yeah. The next speaker we have is Jamie Pasquarello, and Jamie will be talking about a new learning model, vaccinations, and input. Jamie, welcome. You have 3 minutes to speak to the board.
Can you see me? I'm sorry. Technical difficulties. My name is Jamie Pasquarello, and I'm a fourth grade teacher at Dalton Elementary, and I've worked for APS for 15 years. Thank you for this opportunity to share. I know we are going through a tremendous amount of pressure to make the right decisions, and you are doing thankless work. I want to thank you for your time and dedication to the students and employees of Aurora. One thing that helps organizations succeed is listening to people doing the job. That was somewhat addressed in the listening tours. It was an opportunity for people to voice their thoughts on the 6 questions provided. This, I think, should be a continued practice. Yet, we need to use the feedback provided to guide decision-making. For example, despite the change in learning models, the district assessment calendar has not been altered. We are continuing to lose precious instructional time to collect data that has questionable validity and reliability. We are dedicating a full non-student contract day on the 26th to analyze and discuss data, when this could be better spent planning or instructing students. This year requires difficult decisions to be made, and including the voices of those living out those decisions is imperative. Another element of a successful organization is clear and timely communications. This has not been the case, as we were given a 1-week turnaround for the change in learning models, despite that decision being made days before it was released to the public simultaneously with the staff. A heads up would have been appreciated. Also, the rollout of the vaccine process contradicted itself. At the beginning of January, we were told not to put our names on the list, and then we were. Yes, I understand that the openings for teachers changed, but last week it felt as though we educators were on our own to find those precious vaccination appointments. Friday, we did get communications, but again, it came out late in the afternoon. Sending communications well after the staff workday has ended is not an effective strategy to get necessary information to those who need it in a timely manner. Additionally, a successful organization has clear expectations with ample support. Right now, we are teaching both in person and online simultaneously. I've extended an open invitation to district and school board leaders to my classroom to experience what it looks and feels like. If you have never taught in this model, it would be impossible to understand the challenge. Like today, when I lost my Google Meets grid view in the middle of a lesson and being completely unable to see all 15 of my online children learning from home. This is just one small example that happened today. Those challenges are exhausting, overwhelming, and perpetual. Fridays were designed to provide critical planning time to accommodate those demands. With the consideration of possibly changing after spring break, it feels like all the thank yous we have seen and heard are empty. In a recent survey, we were asked to propose a solution. Here's mine. Do what my school does. We have a morning meeting and teach small groups for 30 minutes to an hour. This gives valuable individualized instruction time to our students to meet their needs and the necessary planning time for teachers. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today, and I hope that we can work together to make positive choices for our students and staff of Aurora Public Schools. And I do thank you for all that you do.
The next speaker is Angel Lapire. Angel will be speaking to us about back-to-school efforts. Angel, welcome. You have 3 minutes to address the board.
You guys see me or hear me?
Both.
Oh, fabulous. Okay. I'm going to start really quick by reading a letter from a fellow parent, Kristen Stodden.
For the record for us, please.
Oh, sure. Sorry. Angel Lapire, or Lapire, as you like to call me. That's good too. It's only been 10 years. You're good. When our teenagers were babies, we kissed their feet. They were so tiny, so cute and squeaky clean, and we loved our babies infinitely, right down to their adorable feet. We couldn't help it. If you're a parent, I bet you did or do this too. As our babies grew, their feet grew too, becoming bigger, stronger, more purposeful, and sweaty. We didn't want to kiss their feet anymore, but we loved our babies just as infinitely as before. So we made a bargain with the earth that it would kiss their feet as they walked, ran, danced, climbed, and leapt into their lives. As they developed and grew and forged their path into the world, as they pursued the essential tasks of adolescence, exploration, discovery, socialization, freedom, and determining their place in the world. Teenagers must have all these things to develop normally into who they are meant to be. We know this. We remember it in ourselves. And then we watched as forces beyond our control slowed those same feet we had kissed into silence, isolation, stillness, and worse. At first, we thought this was temporary. It's okay because we need to do this until we know more. But as we learned more, we found that the things taken from our teens that they need to be well are safe for them and others, safer than most other public spaces. Their schools, their sports, arts, clubs, and joys and interests of many kinds. All can be done safely for the well-being of our teens and their vital mental health, physical health, education, and forward development. We were so happy our teenage children could be included in the world again. We waited for our leaders to let them do just that. And we waited and waited. After 10 long months, we are still waiting. For these leaders or anyone else who doesn't yet have a teenager or doesn't recall what teenagers are like, they are hands down some of the most caring, inquisitive, fascinating, intelligent people you could be so lucky to encounter. Some of the brightest human stars their parents know. To watch their shining light dim, to see that they clearly recognize the rejection, discrimination, and lack of empathy they are suffering at the hands of local and state leaders, knowing how especially vulnerable they are mentally due to their stage of development, it's enough to make a parent crazy, frankly. Think you know how you would feel if your baby or child was bigger now? If the actions of leaders in your formerly trusted had thrust your child into isolation, poor mental health, loss of all that they love to do, loss of vital emotional and brain development they must have now to become successful and full adults later, because they've already lost so much time. And time isn't something you have when your brain and body are developing at a rapid fire pace. Think how fiercely that would make you fight to protect your child. This is why so many parents are fighting so persistently for their teenage kids to be allowed back into the world again, taking it all in one step at a time on their precious beloved feet. You understand us. We know you do. It's because we are just like you. When our teenagers were babies, we kissed their feet. I know that took up most of my time, but I just wanted to say that my freshman came home from her first day of class and said, hybrid is just like being in remote, only she has to wear pants. So I might recommend that if we have an opportunity to get our kids back into school more consistently and full time, I am here yet again at your meeting asking for that and thanking you guys very much for what you have done to get us where we're at, but I don't think we're anywhere near where we need to be, and I'd love to see us move ahead further. Thank you.
Thank you, Angel. The next speaker we have is Tiffany Grays. The topic is disproportionate discipline of Black students. welcome to our meeting. Please state your name for the record, and you have 3 minutes to address the board. Oh, okay. So Ms. Graves is not logged in, so we will now go to Savannah Merced. Savannah, have you resolved your tech issues? Okay. Well, those were the only folks who requested to sign up this evening. And perhaps if they join later, maybe under concluding or board work after open dialogue, maybe we can allow them their 3 minutes. So thank you. At this time, that will conclude our preliminary items, and we will move on to the consent agenda. Board, I would like to make a motion to amend the consent agenda to change the results and limitations discussion, as we just had a lengthy discussion in our special open meeting at 4 o'clock. I'd like to move that item to the consent agenda. May I please have a second?
I second it.
Thank you. The motion to amend the agenda was moved by chairperson and seconded by secretary. Is there any discussion? Superintendent Munn?
Board, you identified some items that needed to be changed in the language during your 4 o'clock session. We provided that update.
Can you guys hear me now?
Whoa, we can definitely hear you.
I'm sorry, I don't know what was going on. I logged in, I did everything that I did previously, and I don't know why you guys couldn't hear me before. Did I miss my 3 minutes, or do I have to wait till the next board meeting?
We are on to a different subject. Do you mind waiting for a little bit? And we'll put you back on perhaps after our consent agenda. So maybe give us 10 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, hang out. Thank you.
We provided an updated red line version with those changes to Madam President and to Claudia, just to reflect those changes, and I believe that met with the President's approval. So the revised version is what we understand you to be voting on at this point in time.
And board, just for clarity, the revised version added the language to the results that each result was APS operated schools. So that was the only amendment.
And the months for the data that was talked about.
Oh, yes. Yep, okay. So other than that, is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Claudia, can you please call roll?
Dr. Armstrong Romero,
Aye.
Director Cox,
Aye.
Director Gerken,
Aye.
Director Ivy,
This is to move to the action or to the consent.
Amend the consent agenda.
Just for clarification, if I vote no, it doesn't go to consent. It just stays, it goes back to action, correct?
Correct. Right? Yes.
Well, at present, it's not an action item. It's
It's a discussion
right.
The discussion.
item.
You would need a second motion if you wanted to move it to some kind of action.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
And that's my problem. I'm going to vote no just because of that aspect. I just hopefully understand. You want to move it to consent, which is all 3 items. I don't have an objection to the other 2 items, but I do have an objection to this one. So that's the reason why. But I would not be opposed to moving it to the action item in that aspect so we don't avoid.
Okay, so you're a no?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Director Mason,
Aye.
Director Ortiz,
Aye.
Director Reinhardt.
Aye.
So thank you. The motion fails because we do require majority for that. However, I'd like to make a second motion, and that is to add the item results and limitations to the action items. Yeah. Is there a second?
Second.
The item was moved by chairperson and seconded by Director Ortiz. Oh, who
Oh,
seconded?
that wasn't my
Oh,
second.
sorry, Director.
I just
Okay.
wanted to clarify, I'm not able to vote on the personnel action items tonight, so I just want to make sure by putting those two together that I,
We'll take those items up separately.
okay, got it, thank you.
So, the item was moved and seconded by Director Gerken and myself. Is there any discussion? Okay, hearing none. Claudia?
Dr. Armstrong Romero,
Aye.
Director Cox,
Aye.
Director Gerken,
Aye.
Director Ivy,
Aye.
Director Mason,
Aye.
Director Ortiz,
Aye.
Director Reinhardt.
Aye.
Thank you. So that item, the agenda has been amended to reflect the results and limitations discussion under action items. With that being said, may I request a motion to move forward the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. The item was moved by Director Gerken and seconded by Vice President Cox. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Claudia, can you please call roll?
Dr. Armstrong Romero,
Aye.
Director Cox,
Aye.
Director Gerken,
Aye.
Director Ivy,
Aye.
Director Mason,
Aye.
Director Ortiz,
Aye.
Director Reinhardt.
Aye.
Thank you. And just for clarity, the minutes have been signed and will be signed by myself and will be signed by Secretary. Thank you so much. We are now on to action items. And the first item we have, oh, I'm so sorry. Savannah, are you still with us? Savannah? We can hear you.
Okay.
Savannah, you have 3 minutes to address the board, and can you
All right.
please state your name for the record?
My name is Savannah Merced. Hello, everyone, and I would like to go ahead.
Oh, I just said thank you. Go ahead.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and I would like to thank you for allowing me to speak in front of you this evening. My child is a student in one of the middle schools here in APS. At the beginning of the school year, I was told by one of the counselors in the school that my kid did extraordinarily well on a test, and that the school was going to move my child up a grade. To be clear, I still don't know what test the counselor was referring to. I thought this decision was not only because of the unforeseen circumstances of this particular school year, but so more because I never knew my kid to be extraordinarily well, even though my kid is a very bright young person. Unfortunately, the decision was not presented to me as an option, and I never felt like I had the choice in the matter. If I did, I surely would have declined the opportunity to have my child skip the grade. This happened back in September. It was not until January that I heard from a few teachers that they had a few concerns as to why my child was skip a grade in the first place. I have since learned that teachers have been advocating for me and my child. One teacher in particular had been persistently reaching out to the council's administrator, including the principal, yet none of these people have contacted me about the issue. Finally, this concerned teacher got a hold of me, and it was explained to me that I did have the choice whether or not my child would skip the grade. I have since made it clear that I did not want my child to be skipped a grade, and so my child is in the appropriate grade level. No parent should ever be pressured by a school to make an academic decision that they do not believe this is right for their child. This is why I'm here this evening, to prevent this situation from happening in the future to families like mine. So tonight I am asking that a policy be put in place to require proof of performance and a written consent from a parent or guardian prior to allowing school to alter a child's grade level. If such policy do exist, I would like to request that the district establishes an oversight to ensure that that it is enforced within the schools. Thank you, and sincerely for your time.
Thank you. Savannah, I just
Yes.
sent a message to our superintendent while you were speaking, and I asked if there's someone that you can contact, and he said that someone will reach out to you. So can you make sure, I know that you emailed Claudia to get on the agenda. Can you please make sure that all of your contact information is correct with her so that someone can reach out to you?
As far as the board meeting or what happened to my child?
What happened to your child?
So wait, can you repeat that one more time?
Just that someone will reach out to you to get more information, because obviously right now we only have limited information. And so someone from the district will reach out to you to gather more about what happened and possibly figure out if there's something that could be done in the future as you asked.
And you said you already spoke to the superintendent of my child's school?
No. The superintendent is sitting next to me, and I just asked him if there's someone that you can speak to in the district who can help navigate.
Okay.
And someone will
Okay.
reach out to you. So can you make sure that your contact information is correct with Claudia?
It is.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much for
Thank
reaching.
you.
That
All
would.
right. Thank you.
Thank you. Um, I do want to ask if there's Miss Grays, if she's joined us.
Ma'am, I have one with the first name but no last name, and I cannot confirm that it is Mrs. Graves.
Let me see. Tiffany Grays, are you on?
And this one does not have audio video rights as of yet.
Okay.
We wouldn't know.
Okay. Will they get audio?
I can promote her, but if it's not her, we can remove her?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
And Savannah, you are free to hang up or to continue listening on to our board meeting should you wish to.
Okay, she has access to audio video now, but is not utilizing it. And it looks like she's gone.
Okay. All right, well, that will conclude our opportunity for audience tonight. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties, but thank you all for hanging in there. We are now on to the action items. And the first item we have is the personnel action item. And Board Director Ortiz has chosen to recuse herself due to a personal connection on the personnel action list. So Director Ortiz will not be joining this vote. At this time, I would like to entertain a motion on the personnel action items. Is there a motion?
I move we accept the personnel action items.
Is there a second?
Second.
Director Gerken moved to approve the personnel action items, and Director Reinhardt seconded. Is there any discussion? Hearing none. Claudia, can you please call roll?
Dr. Armstrong Romero?
Aye.
Director Cox?
Aye.
Director Gerken?
Aye.
Director Ivy?
Aye.
Director Mason?
Aye.
Director Reinhardt?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on the action item list is the results and limitation adoption, And board, at this time, I will entertain a motion.
So moved.
Director Gerken has moved the results and limitation adoption. Is there a second?
I second.
Director Mason seconded the motion. Is there any discussion? Director Ivy.
Just briefly, I'm sure most of the public wasn't here when we had our special meeting. So just for reiteration of what it is, I am supportive overall of this process. I'm just not necessarily supportive of this at this particular point, just due to the fact that, as was expressed to us by AJ Crebills, is that this is going to be a difficult conversation to have with the public. So in order to get them, to educate them on understanding why we're making this decision. I guess my issue is I'd rather go through the process of explaining what we're doing in that sense and why we'll be narrowing our focus as a board. I'd rather do that first before we have the vote. However, I totally respect my colleagues here in that aspect. I'm just voting my conscience in that aspect. That's all it is. So that's just my discussion piece for this. Overall, I do agree with the focuses. I think it is extremely narrow. It is uncomfortable at this point to really go to that point, but I understand that we have to probably get as close to that as possible. So that's all it is. But
Director Ivy, just a point of clarity. Do you feel as though the town halls that we led in the engagement sessions that we led around results and limitations was not effective, or that there needed to be more, or?
yes, your latter. It needed to be more, in my opinion. I think we did a great job, I think, with going through the process of asking them what do they think about these limitations, what do you think about these results, and then getting their feedback, and then coming back as a group and discussing that. I think that was great. However, what I don't think we did at all was explain that if we accept this, you need to understand that there may be certain things that as a board, we will no longer necessarily address per se in the same way. We want to trust that to the superintendent to do the job that, within those results and limitations. I think that's a discussion that's difficult because as I've tried to have it with some folks, questions were like, so you're not going to address that? Well, no, we're not. It's not that we're not going to address that. It's just that we may not address it the same way. The process may not be the same. And so it was educating them on the process of what that would look like in the future that I don't think we did enough of. So I just foresee that coming about. And quite honestly, I don't have a solution as to how we would address that. That would be something that I would want to go with AJ about and then talk about how do we go about doing that. Now, I understand he's going to do that, but it's going to be after the fact when we start to go out there and educate the community on what this looks like now. So that was my concern. I hope that was slightly clear. It may not be, but that was the issue just to kind of answer your question.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts?
I'm excited, as I said earlier, that our focus will be narrowed. At the same time, we'll be able to talk to the community in other ways. So this will help us, I think. Obviously the hope is that we can focus on student achievement and move forward that way, and at the same time have those guardrails in place. So I look forward to working in this new way.
Yes, I agree. And I also agree with Director Ivy that this does look different. And I believe that all of us at some point have expressed frustration with opportunity for audience and not being able to dialogue and having certain restrictions and not necessarily being as transparent as we want to be because we're not really engaging. And now we have the opportunity to host town halls and to do other community engagement types of things that shouldn't necessarily be a part of the board meeting. Board meeting is business, right? And we have to figure out other ways to engage the community. I mean, I think that Director Reinhardt in our December meeting, or somebody in our December meeting, offered to do a town hall before this meeting. And that probably would have been an opportunity to engage around what we're talking about tonight. And so just reminding the board that it doesn't require us to have a meeting to schedule a town hall. We can absolutely do that. And to be quite honest, as chairperson, I can just say the second or the first meeting of the month that we typically had board work meetings, we can make that a town hall meeting should we choose to go that route. But there are different ways to engage, and that excites me. Also narrowing the focus on how we hold Superintendent Munn and the team accountable to achievement and student outcomes. The only reason a board exists is to improve student outcomes in the district, right? And so with our focus, we're able to really narrow that in and own in on it. I'll shut up now. Anybody else?
I think you make a very valid point in stating that that opens opportunities for community engagement. And to Director Ivy's comments, I think in very limited number of conversations I've tried to have as well, saying some of this is kind of scary, a little bit frightening to people that the district is no longer accessible to them. And by talking President Armstrong Romero about opening up community engagement even further is a very key piece to rolling it out, if you will, and educating our community, our constituents on exactly why that is happening.
Absolutely. And if we heard tonight, there was a call to action from RISE, right? And although that is one group in a community of a whole bunch of other groups, we heard that call to action very clearly. And so perhaps we have a town hall, invite RISE and the entire community to talk about disproportionality on African American students or on students in general, on the discipline and school to prison pipeline, et cetera. There are endless possibilities to how we engage the community, but you're right, it looks different than what we've done in the past. And it's scary. Change is not always welcome, but it is exciting, at least for me. Any other thoughts?
Well, I'm glad that we are thinking about this in a wide variety of ways because, as you guys recalled, I did send out something trying to get this in place as far as having a town hall with all the different groups this month. And so I'm looking forward to us moving forward with that.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
Absolutely. And I agree. I mean, I know that Director Mason and I had some conversations, and we have to do we have to schedule a meeting. And unfortunately, time is not everybody's friend. And we can't schedule our meetings around certain groups' availability. We have to be consistent. And it's the board leading these community engagement and community sessions, not us asking people to present to us. That's not the purpose of it. But I'm sure AJ will give us more guidance around that. We do have another special open meeting in March with him, so and he's joining us later on as well. Anybody else?
I would be eager to find out how to get this process rolling in terms of, scheduling consistent and regular town halls, the sooner. And acknowledging that it'll be, it's an election year for our board later this year. Wanting to do that work with everyone here before any dynamics change. So just putting it out there that I'm eager to start that. I'm happy to initiate that email or soon with AJ unless he's listening somehow. Yeah.
I think that if there's consensus for doing the first Tuesday of the month for the board, I think that we can just maybe acknowledge that, and perhaps we have our amazing scheduling folks over here who might be able to add it to the calendar. Yes, Mark? And who may be able to add that to the calendar, so no email needed. We just, we have to publish or post those meetings because all of us, I'm assuming, will be a part of that. So, Claudia, if you don't mind.
I'll work with Michelle.
Awesome, thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody else? Okay, hearing none, if you all have forgotten, the motion on the table from Director Gerken is to approve the adoption of results and limitations. It was seconded by Director Reinhardt, and hearing no further discussion, Claudia, can you please take roll?
I'm sorry, was it Director Reinhardt or Director Mason?
Oh, Director Mason, I'm sorry. Director Mason, sorry.
I got you.
Dr. Armstrong Romero?
Aye.
Director Cox?
Aye.
Director Gerken?
Aye.
Director Ivy?
No.
Director Mason?
Aye.
Director Ortiz?
Aye.
Director Reinhardt?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes, and the results and limitations as set forth will be adopted. So thank you, Board. We are now on to...
Sorry, I received a message asking for a reminder to all board members to speak directly into their microphones if folks are having trouble hearing us.
Oh, thank you. That's a good reminder. The next item we have on the agenda is information. And so we are now on to our COVID-19 update. And Superintendent Munn, I will turn it over to you.
Madam Chair, could I ask if the board would be willing to flip items A and B so I could just keep those two last pieces together?
Sure. Board, any objections? Hearing none, go forth.
So that leaves us with, oh, so I should just do it on, gotcha. So let me go ahead and do items A and C together right now, and then we'll bring up Mr. Johnson for any answers on the quarterly financial report. By way of a COVID update, generally speaking, I don't know that I have any news for you that is news beyond what you know from watching TV. Things are going in a very strong positive trend in the state as it relates to COVID rates. If you look at today's rates in Adams County, it's 244, and Arapahoe County is 270. If you look at the APS specific rate, it's 241. Those are, we have not been at that lower rate since roughly September. And so we hit some highs in November, but we've essentially been systematically going down and improving across our counties. And so that's a very positive thing, and Colorado's doing very well in that space when you compare it nationally. As you know, today is our first day of full in-person learning in elementary. We're very excited by that, to have our kids back in the building. We still have about 40% of our kids, on average, roughly speaking, who are fully remote. So 60% of our kids P through 5 in the buildings. But we are going through and educating and doing the hard work of getting everybody acclimated back again to our environments. Board, you're aware of the transition that we made, and that we will be making another transition post-spring break as we increase our in-person learning opportunities at the middle school and also at the high school, moving to a space where we have every kid in the building every day. That looks differently in middle school and high school, but we're excited to increase the frequency of in-person learning, which we know is incredibly impactful for our students. On the vaccination front, while we have very little control over the vaccination process, we are doing our best to coordinate with partners to provide opportunities for our staff. We know that roughly from just two providers, KP and UC Health, there were over 4,000 invitations sent out for vaccinations kind of Thursday through Monday. From those two providers, we know there were about 2,000 or so people who actually did get vaccinated. A number of folks declined those appointments, we assume because they were getting vaccinated at one of our other partners or some other venue that they found, Walmart, Walgreens, what have you. So we believe we are well on the way. We may even be at the place where close to everyone who wanted to get vaccinated within the system has gotten that first dose. We don't have an actual accurate way to track that, but we believe that given the number of invitations that went out and the number of declinations, that we have to be very close to that number. And certainly by the end of this weekend, with an additional round of invitations going out, I would have a very high degree of confidence that people would have received that first dose should they be interested in that. Which means that by about spring break, everyone in the system who would want to would have the opportunity to have been fully vaccinated. And so we're excited about that opportunity and thankful for all our healthcare providers for doing the hard work and making sure that happens. Let me continue on then into the Recovery Essential Expectation Report, because I think that's kind of a key connection. If you see in your item there, in the report, we have laid out for you the 4 essential expectations that we committed to back in, I want to say April, the framework that we were committed to for our recovery. Then back in June, we came to you and said, within that framework, here are the essential expectations that we as APS believe we should make to the community as the things that we are going to deliver on this year, regardless of educational model. We presented that to you, and we wanted to track with the best data that we can for pouring it. IT can help me out with that. And so as you go, I won't go through each one of these obviously, but if you go through and look at those expectations, you can see the format is first the expectation in that first block. Secondly are the key action steps that were taken, and third, some data to reflect on and to report how we're doing in relation to those essential expectations. I think this is incredibly important to focus on and incredibly impactful because we, with your support, made a decision back in the summer that the 2020 school year was not going to be just about holding on and surviving. It was going to be about continuing to move forward for our kids as much as we could in the circumstances that we had, knowing it would be very difficult circumstances, knowing that we would be subject to constant changes. But we wanted to be clear with our community that we were committed to keep moving things forward for kids, keep moving things forward for the district. And so this is how we identified what that looked like, what that forward momentum looked like in trying to do those things. Some key things to point out for you, as we've talked about, we know there has been a challenge with student engagement. Our students reflect that both in surveys, but also in our data around average daily attendance. We know that that's an ongoing challenge, but how do we increase engagement for our students? How do we increase their opportunity to connect with adults in those spaces? We're at a point now where obviously the largest systemic response to that is increasing in-person learning, and we believe that that's a significant response to the data that we're seeing here, and we believe that we will see an impact on our students, particularly as we go into a time of year where we're often able to accelerate learning opportunities because of the foundation that's been laid in the first semester. If you look at on page 5, some of the resources and supports to implement the academic program, we see some strong responses from our educators around some of the professional development that they've received and some of the structures to support their learning. We know it's an incredibly difficult environment. We know that the work to implement our asynchronous and our hybrid programs have been incredibly difficult on educators, but we are confident in continuing to add supports to those structures, continue to add professional development, continue to add structures to try and support those things. It's going to be a struggle all year long. This is an environment that nobody was prepared for, nobody planned for in their educational atmosphere, and we're all putting in structures to try and support that. But if you see nationally all of the research and data around that struggle, we know that we need to continue to build to support that, but it's going to be a continual challenge. And then I think one of the last things to point out would just be some of the feedback from our students that I think was incredibly impactful. I don't recall exactly which pages, but in 2 areas. One, the health and safety in our buildings, their sense of feeling that the adults are taking care of them, their sense of feeling that people are working hard to protect them is incredibly important. And then also the feedback related to their connection with staff. Fairly good numbers around their access and opportunity to connect with staff. Although there are some sad numbers as it relates to their feelings of isolation, their feelings of loneliness, their feelings of a lack of connection. Again, we think that the increase in in-person learning is a direct response to this and will help support that. And so we are excited to provide more of that opportunity to our kids. I think the last thing then, as by way of update, you have that student survey, you have all that data, so I'm happy to answer questions about that. We will continue to look at and monitor with all of our different partners what the appropriate steps are, what the appropriate mitigation layers are. It changes week to week, it changes every 2 weeks. Particularly, there is some challenge now in the direction between the state, Tri-County Health, and CHASA around what can happen in sports and activities, who has the authority to make that decision, how do you get further guidance on that. That is a bit of a bureaucratic Gordian knot right now that we're all trying to navigate, but we will continue to try and make sure that we follow closely to what we understand to be the health advice and obviously the orders that we have to respond to from the state. With that, I'm open for questions.
Superintendent Munn, I don't know if the board has seen the CASB email that there is a draft resolution from CASB to suspend assessment data for 2021 and pause 2021 and pause 2021 CMAS testing. It's a draft resolution, and obviously, from their perspective, there's pros and cons. Obviously, some of the pros were that there were pandemic disruptions, and some others said that the assessment is needed to gauge learning loss. So just a heads up for the board to be aware of. And Superintendent Munn, is it your thought that our board needs to take any action as to that draft resolution?
Well, as you know, the legislature reconvened today. They opened in January, took a month off, and came back today. We expect a bill and discussion about CMAS to happen in the first week or so of over here in the next week or so of the session. We have made APS's position clear both in your legislative document and also in various letters that I've signed on to with other superintendents from the area. So it does not, my take is there's no lack of understanding where APS stands at the legislature, and also we've instructed our lobbyists to support those efforts to ask for a waiver from the federal government around CMAS or to get whatever leeway we could around that if that's not possible. So we're clear on the record around that. So from a functional matter, I don't believe that the resolution is necessary. Certainly, if the board wants to add its voice in that formal way, that doesn't hurt. You're also, one of the more direct ways is for you to reach out to members of the delegation and just let them know your concerns or your feelings.
So that is a question to the board. I know that Westminster drafted their own resolution stating the same. I don't know if other districts have, but that's an option that we can join on. We can either join on to the CASB one, or we can create our own, similar to what CASB's recommended. It's up to you all, or we can take no action and reach out to legislators individually. Thoughts?
Well, I'm not sure how fast things move, but if that's going to come up before the legislature very soon, I don't know that drafting a resolution of our own is timely.
Right.
But I would certainly be willing to contact folks and let them know my opinion.
Okay. Is that the same for the rest of the board?
I would say so, unless there's nothing, unless we hear nothing from a bill that might be presented, et cetera. And then I would be very favorable toward putting forth a resolution.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess we'll gauge it, and perhaps if we don't hear anything by our March board meeting, business meeting, then we can add the draft resolution that CASB drafted to our agenda and possibly just vote on that.
Is the testing window in April?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any questions on the COVID-19 recovery report or the update? Please.
Just a couple of things. Is it the HR team that coordinated with Kaiser, et cetera, to get our staff involved in the vaccination process?
It's a combination of the HR department, the health services, and Mr. Segel.
Well, I would just personally say thank you to all of them for that effort, and I know there's a lot of good, positive feelings about that process getting started. So grateful that folks have been able to access that. And I wanted to ask about, we heard a few concerns about ventilation in buildings, and some of our buildings are older. Some have a number of interior classrooms that don't have windows. Is there a process in place to improve that in that type of classroom?
Yeah, we sent out at the beginning of the school year a fairly detailed kind of update around the work that we've done to update HVAC around the system. Happy to resend that to you. It's also on our COVID website. I certainly can't give you chapter and verse right now, but I can make sure you have access to that link.
Thank you. And I know that no one person has to report that they did or did not get a vaccine, but is that information that the district is collecting as people are willing to submit it?
So employers have the option of making it mandatory for staff to get vaccinated. As of yet, that is not something we have done or have seriously contemplated, but we certainly have that option available to us. And we'll have to, kind of evaluate over the next several weeks and months what this may mean operationally for us as we go into next year. Particularly because Tri-County Health has now adopted the protocols that say that if you have been vaccinated, you do not need to be quarantined, which has implications for staffing, for coverage, and all those things, and can have serious impacts in the building if you have staff members who have, for whatever reasons, chosen not to get vaccinated. However, they then need to be quarantined, and that can really cause some imbalance in a building. And so at the very least, we may need to go to a process where we at least know where the staff are who are not vaccinated, so that we can understand if we may have critical coverage issues or have to think differently about things. Another issue is there are potential implications on the back end as far as leave that people are entitled to, ADA implications if people chose not to get vaccinated, that we may need to just have a clear database around to understand. This is all very new. It's all moving very fast, and we're hopeful to get some guidance from the various entities that do those kinds of things, EEOC, OSHA, whoever else. But as of right now, we do not have a mechanism to collect that or a database that we are maintaining in any way. The data that we have comes from our health providers who just because we provided them with lists of our employees, they know who is our employee, and they just give us raw numbers to say, here's the number of people from APS who've been vaccinated.
I have a question.
Director Ivy was before you, but I think
I was
Director
just going to
Reinhardt.
say thank you.
Okay. Director Ivy?
Sure. My questions were just around, I'm sure you saw this letter from AEA with respect to our Fridays, the Fridays that they have. So I just for clarity's sake and just for the public out there, the Fridays are not designated as asynchronous. That's your plan, correct?
No,
They will be asynchronous.
we don't know.
Okay. So will they continue to have a planning period, I guess? That we have been inundated with email after email of this aspect. Will they continue to have a planning period on Fridays?
So when we sent out a letter to the community February 8th or so, what we clearly identified in the letter was that Fridays between now and spring break would continue to be asynchronous. However, we had identified some concern about student engagement and student attendance on that Friday, and so we wanted to spend that period of time between now and spring break evaluating what do we do. We have evidence that this is not working for kids, and so what should we do about that? And so that's what we're doing. We're spending the next month evaluating what we should do about that. I've asked Equity and Learning to engage in that. I know they've reached out to teachers to get their feedback and voice around that. I've reached out to AEA to get their voice and feedback around that, and so we'll spend the next month doing an evaluation process and then coming to some conclusion, which we intend to announce right before spring break.
So you said you've reached out to AEA. Everything they're saying is saying that that's just false. So I guess my question to you is, when you say you are going to be reaching out, I'm just curious. I mean, just for the record, my kids have made the decision not to go back, and so I know the teachers are going to be doing still double duty, still teaching, in person, but also via remote in that aspect. So I guess, will you all be engaging them in that aspect, number one? And then number two, they've asked for supports. I don't know what that looks like. Is there additional supports that will be available to them as well?
So taking up the first point, if you're referring to the AEA letter from yesterday, it was odd for a number of reasons. And quite frankly, it was offensive for a number of reasons. But one of the oddities of it was, in the first paragraph, they make reference to saying that we have not sought input since winter break. However, in the second to last paragraph, they specifically reference the fact that I had reached out last week to get input about asynchronous Fridays. And so we have, and we're engaging in that process. As it relates to supports, we have gone through, we've gone through any number of mechanisms in the last 60 days to try to engage with teachers and to get feedback around what supports are needed. You're aware of many of those, in trying to add supports to those structures, both from instructional supports to personnel to those things. And we keep adding to those things, and we know it's a very difficult work, and we believe that also, given the fact that we're only, at this point, 5 weeks into in-person learning in this environment, as opposed to some of our colleagues who have been doing it since August, that there's also a learning curve to overcome to some of those pieces. We believe that we can continue to add supports to overcome some of that, but again, no doubt what we are trying to do is incredibly difficult, but it's also incredibly difficult however we try to do this.
Can I just, for clarity for the public, because we're talking about a hypothetical letter, or not a hypothetical, it's not public to the public. We received a correspondence, and the correspondence from the Aurora Education Association Board of Directors is not made public, but we are in receipt of it, and I can read it to the public if we need to. We also have the president of the Aurora Education Association in our overflow room who can speak to the letter as well, should we need to have that clarity, because I don't want to talk about a letter that the public can't see and that the association doesn't.
Can we ask Bruce to come and speak? That would seem like would be wise.
It's executive content, so the letter is posted, but it's executive, viewable only to the board. And as the president, I can say that we are in receipt of it. We don't need to read it. I can, if the board so requests, and we can also ask association president, Mr. Wilcox, to come on over and speak to the letter should the board have questions specific to that letter, and it does relate to the COVID update. So, board thoughts?
I would like for you to invite him over if he's here to speak to us.
And I apologize, anytime we get anything in our email, I think it's public, so in that aspect, that's why I was asking, so. But if it's not, I actually don't need him to come over and read it unless the board does. I just wanted to point some things out in there. We obviously heard statements from teachers today. We've been inundated with emails throughout, so we haven't addressed it, so I didn't want to just leave.
Sure. And it's typically public when Claudia is copied into it, and it's my understanding that it was only sent to board members, not to any district official, so that's why.
Right.
Sir?
If I can, no, it is a public letter. We just have not yet posted it.
Oh, okay.
Right, because it did not come to staff until later on, sometime this afternoon.
Okay.
We viewed it as public comment as part of this meeting, and we would post it after this meeting.
Got it, okay. My apologies.
Public comment.
Okay, so, board, Director Ivy said that there's no, that he doesn't see a need for Mr. Wilcox to come over. However, board, it's up to you all. Seeing no from Director Gerken.
I don't need him, unless now that he's over there listening to all this, he would like to come make some comments in the room. But to address also what Director Ivy is addressing, the biggest concern I pick up from most of this communication that we've received is the asynchronous Friday and a definite ask to keep it that way. And I don't believe that's just a teacher ask. I think that's a staff ask. Admin has taken on IRT, something response team, I'm sorry, I forgot.
Incident response.
Thank you. Incident response team, every time they have a staff member with symptoms or a positive case, and then the exposures and all the follow-through with that, they're still doing teacher evaluations. Teachers are still involved in teacher evaluations. That has not, to best of my knowledge, has not gone away during this school year.
The evaluations?
The teacher evaluations, staff evaluation systems are still in place. So that time is utilized very, it's very important to staff in general. They have grading, as we've heard teachers say, one-to-one meetings with kids. I think Jamie Pasquarello said her building does 30-minute small groups in the morning to target specific needs of specific students. It is a time that they're still working with students. Maybe not the entire day, but then they might be working with a coach, they might be planning with their team, they might be sorting out what worked in re-entering yet another change in their school day. It's extremely, extremely valuable time from one employee group to the next. So I think the urgency that we hear in the context we've received is very real and a genuine ask.
Sure.
I think the question, Director Ryan, if I may, is how do we respond to the student need?
And is that part of the survey that just went out?
Well, no, it's part of, the ongoing conversation that we're trying to figure out how to
Right.
do that, right? And so we think it is the appropriate and the only thing to do is when we see that kind of student issue to at least engage in a conversation, engage in a review of, and to see, is there something different we can be doing? And so when I see a letter from the board of the AEA saying that we shouldn't even engage in that conversation, that we shouldn't even engage in that discussion, that quite frankly is offensive to me.
And I understand that, and I'm not referencing just that letter in particular. There are other contacts, other conversations, as well as that letter. I understand that.
I'd also like to uplift the few, they're not as many emails from special education providers saying Fridays will give us an opportunity to meet these hours. So, yes, 5 days a week, because we in the CSS world don't even know how we're gonna get these kids the services they need, which is quite personal for me, right? And I mean, not just that, but I just want to uplift those emails. Like I said, they're not coming through as strongly, and we're not getting, 10 of the same copy and pasted. It's those specific ones saying, how else will we do this? And then again, thinking of those horrific stories, like was mentioned earlier about students in Nevada and suicide rates being increased, and I feel like students are saying we need more, and we've been walking this fine line and trying to balance teacher safety and student safety, and right now for me it's like students are like screaming like we need this, right? And like I said, these emails from ESS providers saying, how else will we get these services in? So just wanted to point that out too. They're not as strong, but those emails are there and just as important.
Absolutely, and I don't want to put and it's my apologies. I shouldn't have even offered, perhaps, to put Mr. Wilcox on the spot. Oh, he's in the hallway. Oh, I do want to apologize publicly, because it does set a poor precedent that if we receive a letter, then we're going to call on people to speak to us and back up their letter. So I apologize for that. However, since I did throw his name out there and he's somewhere lurking in the hallway, Mr. Wilcox, I'm happy to have you join us for a few minutes, and again, my sincerest apologies to you for perhaps putting you on the spot, because it doesn't set a good precedence to ask people to come at the last second and speak to a letter that was sent to the board. So my apologies. Hi, welcome.
Madam President, what can I answer for you?
Well, I don't know if, Director Ivy is, okay.
So here's the struggle. It's balancing the needs of the students against the needs of the teachers. And that's where my struggle is. The students obviously need us. However, if there are no teachers in the school, students don't get taught. And so I'm trying to understand, how do you respond to that aspect? If I hear Superintendent Munn, this is a student need, and I hear the teachers, there is this need to also be prepared for planning. So can you tell us, I guess, at least what is the thought process in terms of how we balance these things? Obviously, our students have got to learn. Their mental health has got to be taken into account. How do you balance those, and how would you suggest those things be balanced?
Well, I'm going to strongly advocate that we continue to have asynchronous Friday. And it is about students. It sounds like, or it can easily be made to sound like it's about teachers.
Can you speak into the microphone, please?
Yeah, raise it.
It's clear. Well, just so you know, I made it there.
Oh,
But also, yeah, there we go.
thank you.
Is that better?
Sorry. Yes, thank
Oh,
you.
see, I just thought it was me. So it is about students. In order for me to move a student forward, I have to have a well-planned lesson. Every teacher is evaluated on that. And now you've asked teachers to teach in two different modes, both to students in person and to those who are remote at the same time. And that requires additional work, additional planning. I think Director Gerken and I had this conversation last week. If I have all my students in front of me and I have all my materials in the room, there's a lot less for me. There's not a lot less, but there's quite a bit less for me to plan. If I have students that are at home and I'm going to pull a group, whether it's virtually or in person, I have to have activities for all the rest of my students to do while I'm doing that. If I have to create activities for my at-home students to do, that takes time to plan that. But I'm also creating them for my students in front of me. And in this current circumstance, it also means that I have limited resources because I'm not able to share things, right? So I have to make sure that I have individual resources for each student. That the activities that maybe I used to have where multiple students could use the same things, I now either have to have multiple copies or I have to have different activities in order for those students to do. The quality of the instruction I give is directly linked to the amount of plan time I have. And that's what's so important for people to understand. And so when you take away the ability for teachers to have that time on Friday, because it's not like they get Friday off. They are doing activities for half of the day, whether it's professional development, taking attendance, having small group instruction in the morning, and then they plan in the afternoon. You've doubled their plan load. And you've asked them to do it in the same amount of time or with slightly more time than they had last year. But you've doubled their load. So I would argue that asynchronous learning is meeting, having that asynchronous Friday is meeting the needs of students by allowing for well-planned instruction.
So is there a way to have a carve-out for special ed?
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question.
Like, so that we can make sure we have those minutes of instruction? Like,
so are you
No, no,
talking
am I-
about
am I-
special
am I-
service providers still meeting their minutes of
Yes.
instruction for students?
Yeah, is there a way, is that allowable within our contract to have a carve-out so that we can make sure that they have that instruction? Or is that like an exception that needs to be made, or? I don't know exactly how to ask this question, but I'm saying that that's what I'm hearing is in need. And also we need that asynchronous planning time for the rest of the students. Am I understanding
It
that
sounds
correctly?
like you're suggesting that either all special needs students or certain ones come to school on Fridays so that more of those minutes can be met. While still maintaining, the carve-out pieces, while still maintaining an asynchronous Friday mostly.
I'm wondering if
Is
that
that
would
the
be a
question?
violation of our master agreement.
I don't think we've been playing by the rules. I'm not sure that it's even covered in our master agreement. I mean, asynchronous Fridays are not covered in our master agreement. In other words, we, meaning the district and the association, have been trying to do this as we go. And so there have been places where we've waived certain rights, but there's also things in our contract that didn't exist because it wasn't written around a pandemic.
So, just to move this conversation along and for your time's sake, the correspondence will be posted publicly, so the public will be able to review the comments. And I think if there are any items that you feel, and obviously we've heard the asynchronous Fridays, and the district is gathering more information and going to communicate to the board at some point the next steps. And so with that being said, Bruce, do you have anything that you'd like to add from the correspondence or clarify? If not, then I'm sorry and thank you for coming over.
Don't apologize. That's why I'm here alone in the overflow room. No, I don't think there's anything I want to clarify other than to say if you have questions about specific things, please ask. I think this letter is an example of the frustration of the board of directors, and very much a concern. We do not want to be in a position that we're fighting for asynchronous Fridays after they've been taken away,
Right.
but want to advocate on the front end and make sure that those voices are heard.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That's clear, and Superintendent Munn and the board understands and hears that. Thank you. Thank you so much.
If I may, Madam Chair, but
Please.
just closing the loop on this issue, Claudia, if you could project that chart. Again, and I view this as a concern with the AEA board, not with Mr. Wilcox in particular, but I do believe this letter grossly misstates and represents any number of things. And I think that's very unfortunate. But I want you to understand the context that we're operating in right now. So right now, we are mandated to have certain amount of planning time. APS has always been very a leader in that, providing significantly more planning time than peers around the metro area. In this last year, then this is just the high school, we have added even more planning time by the asynchronous Fridays. All that represents time that is very important and very important to the structural planning, but it's also time where students are not in direct contact, which we know is a challenge. And so the question that we have is, given this amount of planning time, is there something different we can be doing, something we can evaluate, something we can look at? So for example, Ms. Pasquarello made a suggestion, right? And that's all we have identified is that what we want to do over the next month is a process of looking at that and trying to identify, is there something different we can be doing that serves the needs of students, but also is supportive of our educators? Fundamentally, I believe that is what you would expect us to do, the work that you would expect us to do, to look at and to engage in. And so I think it's important that you understand what we're doing, what we're not doing, and also that we are doing this from a place of trying to drive to the multiple stakeholders that you by policy expect us to speak to and look to and respond to. Thank you, Claudia.
If I may, I don't doubt these numbers at all. I'd have to go research them, but I would say this is based on high school, and the high school teaching model is much different than the elementary PA middle school model.
Very true.
And so those numbers are going to be a lot less in those other places. So, all right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. We are now onto the quarterly financial report, and if Mr. Johnson is still with us, Mr. Johnson, the floor is yours.
Good evening, and I am still here, and good to see everybody's face tonight. You know, I'm going to start by a brief overview and address some questions that were asked, and then take it from there. Ultimately, the quarterly financials that are in your board packet are a summary of the first 2 quarters of the fiscal year from July 1st through the end of December. And they basically summarize what has been spent to date versus what's been budgeted to kind of give an idea of where we're at as a percent of our expenditures. The highlights that I would probably point out were also cited in the questions that we received from board member Nichelle Ortiz, and that's, revenues have changed, and that was reflected also in our readopted budget. General fund revenues have changed in particular because we were able to spend CARES dollars during the adopted budget that we presented to the board in June and that was approved. We weren't sure whether we could spend the CARES dollars we received or not. And so those revenues, as far as the general fund was concerned, improved tremendously once we knew that we could spend those CARES dollars under the federal requirements and guidelines that we received. There was a question about charter school service charges and why that was significantly lower than projected. And I think this category is probably a good example as to why a quarterly report might not paint the entire picture. The way that revenue line works is as we charge charter schools for a certain array of services. And so whatever revenues we collect is directly offset by the expenditures that were made to provide those services. So if they were up or down, then the commensurate expenditure would be up or down as well. However, it's a little bit funky in the middle of the year how this works because we ultimately initially charge them for how much they might utilize, and then we credit back if that's less during the year. And that process doesn't happen until the end of the fiscal year. And so looking at that particular line in the middle of the year is probably a little bit difficult to discern where we'll end up landing until we really account for what those credits add up to as well. And so we'll just have to monitor that line. There was a question about employee salaries, purchase services and supplies and materials, and whether those expenditures significantly increased due to CARES spending and pandemic spending. On that end, I can say that, first of all, employee salaries increased based on the fact that we programmed the salary increases that commenced on July 1st. And we first put those salary increases budgeted at a district-wide number and then dispersed them through the readopted process. And so that's why those salaries are higher after readopted than they are now. To address purchase services and supplies and materials, those definitely increased because of our recovery planning for pandemic-related expenditures. If you remember, we had a reserve of $10 million to draw from for potential unforeseen expenditures on that end. And so as we expend it, those show up in other lines outside of that amount. But yes, that's a correct observation that those expenditures did increase because of that recovery planning and recovery spending. I think the last question that was asked was, is there any concern about the Tabor reserve and fiscal management reserve about how they decreased year over year in terms of what we were budgeting? The answer to that is actually pretty easy. It's simply the constitutionally required Tabor reserve is simply a percent of our revenues, and Tabor is 3%, and the fiscal management reserve is 2%. And so if we were projecting at the beginning of the year to have less general fund revenues compared to last year, then the Tabor Reserve would also be less because it would be a lower amount as a 3% amount of those revenues. Of course, that required reserve amount bounced back up as we realized some of those revenues were going to be offset by CARES dollars. And I'm happy to entertain any other questions, but I wanted to make sure that those questions were addressed because I think there were good observations about where we're at right now in the middle of the fiscal year.
Director Ortiz, would you like any clarification on any of those points?
No, thank you, Brett.
Board, any other questions? Brett, I anticipate you will start receiving more questions as we have adopted our results and guardrails this evening. More questions about how the budget is spent on items related to early literacy, post-workforce readiness, and equity. So just a heads up in thinking about that and planning presentations for the future. So thank you so much for being here tonight. Sounds like there are no other questions, and we will let you go.
Thank you. Happy to answer any future questions you have.
Great, thank you, sir. All right, we are now on to board work, and we are on to progress monitoring. We do have our amazing facilitator, AJ Crabo, from Council of Great City Schools, who has been helping to lead and guide us through some of these changes that our board has made. And I will turn it over to AJ for the progress monitoring and self-evaluation. AJ, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's always good to be back. This evening, the only progress that you have to monitor at the moment is your own. And so we will get to that in a moment in the form of your quarterly self-evaluation, just a routine check-in to see where the board is kind of relative to its expectations. But before we get to that, I do want to talk through a little bit about the progress monitoring work that you all be taking on. So if you could pull down the share for just a moment, and we'll come back to this very soon. So what happens is now that you all have identified what you say are the highest need, highest leverage, most urgent priorities of your community as it relates to the community's vision for what children should know and be able to do, and the community's values that are the non-negotiables that have to be honored on the journey to the vision. Now that you've adopted those, much of your work, indeed, as you get proficient at it, half of each meeting, ideally, is invested in monitoring progress toward your results policies. And the other half of the meeting can be all the other stuff, monitoring progress toward limitations, voting, any other statutory requirements, and so on and so forth. But the idea is to demonstrate on a monthly basis that this board wants to make the main thing, that you want to invest half of your time each month across all meetings. So if you have 5 meetings, they add up to a total of an hour, across all 5 meetings, then you'd be looking at, did we spend at least half an hour this month monitoring progress, really checking in, are our students getting what our community says that they deserve? If across all of your meetings you spend 10 hours, then the question is, do we spend at least 5 hours of that really monitoring progress? Like, what are we doing as a board that is demonstrating what our priorities are, that's demonstrating that student learning is the number one reason for which we're here, and how you choose to spend your time tells the community, tells your staff exactly where your priorities are. Are you spending it entirely on the adult issues, which you cannot escape, or are you carving out at least half of your time to actually focus in, are children getting what we owe them as a community? So that's what progress monitoring is all about. saying what are the expectations that we've adopted for our children, and that's your results policies, and then saying where are we right now, and are we getting closer to that expectation, or are we just kind of staying the same relative to that expectation, or are we actually getting farther away from that expectation? That is the intention of monitoring. And so what will happen each month is that you will create a calendar. We'll be working on that in the weeks ahead now that you've adopted your results and limitations policies. We'll create a calendar that says month by month by month exactly which slice of your results policies will you monitor each month. And so that will be known out in advance. We should know 1, 2, 3 years, 4 years in advance exactly what is the student data that we'll be looking at from month to month to month. And then looking at that to figure out, are we seeing improvements? Are we flatlined? Are we declining? And then, of course, importantly, what is the administration's response to data? So that's what progress monitoring is. And again, the intention is to get to the point, an intention that you all co-created in our series of workshops last fall. The intention is to get to the point when asked, what percentage of your time over the course of the month do you all think should be invested in monitoring progress towards student performance? And while you all had slightly different numbers, the average of all of them was just over 50%. And rolled that back down and said, okay, got it. So let's imagine at a minimum you want to spend half of your time each month across all of your meetings. What would that look like? And so in subsequent meetings, what we'll do is I'll work with Rico and staff to develop some sample monitoring reports that have the data in it that you need. And then we will actually practice the monitoring conversations to get really good at asking questions that help the board and the community understand where are our students relative to what our expectations as a community are for those students. So that's what we'll be doing. It'll take up a significant amount of time only because you all say that that is the priority that you want to place on it. So let me pause for a second. What questions do you have about the progress monitoring work that the board is going to step into that by your expectation will slowly grow to take up half of your board meeting time each month? What questions or comments do you have? This is a significant change in how you all spend time. As we'll identify here in a few moments, your time is predominantly utilized now and has been on adjudicating matters related to what the adults do or don't like, what does or doesn't work for adults. And of course, many of those adults, come with a heart advocating for children. But what you aren't systematically spending your time on is what difference is all of that actually making in reality for children. That has not been the focus of your time. And so going from it not being the focus of your time to it being half of your time means that all of the other issues that you traditionally wrestle with is going to have to get squished down to figuring out how do we manage our time such that all of the adult issues don't take up all of every meeting, but really only take up half the meeting, and student learning conversations take up the other half. But that's going to require major changes in how you conduct your time together as a board each month. Those changes are going to require conversations, additional conversations with the community. You've already had some, but additional conversations with the community. You owe it to your community to be aggressive about clarifying, here are the changes and here's why we chose to make these particular changes. And so because it's such a big shift, this shift to spending half of your time on monitoring student progress each month, and then half of your time addressing all of the other statutorily required and adult issues that come up each month. Since that's going to be a big shift, I just want to check in. What questions, comments do you have as we start to make that adjustment? Questions or comments?
How will our agenda take any more changes? I know this work in October, kind of pick through the agenda and, what's needed and not. We anticipate any agenda changes, and I guess the way we move through our meetings.
So I didn't hear the last of that. It kind of trailed off.
Any changes to our agenda or how we get through our meetings.
Well, as an example, look at your agenda this evening. What percentage of your meeting this evening have you allocated to evaluating student performance, student growth? So what is your current percentage for this evening that you had intended to allocate to monitoring student learning? It's not rhetorical.
I don't see any agenda items that are.
Yeah, so it's not currently on the agenda. So the correct answer is 0% right now. And so going from 0% to 50% is going to be a significant change in your adult behavior. And so as you make that change, because it's such a significant change, there's an obligation, and Marcus alluded to this earlier, the obligation falls to you, not to the superintendent, not to the community. It falls to the 7 of you to explain, to express the reason and nature of that change. Now, I suspect as you kind of get adept at this conversation and thoughtful about it, you'll get more and more capable at explaining it. But for now, it's going to take a little bit of practice and growth. So if you were going to explain why you want to go from spending no time talking about whether or not students are learning to half of your time each month talking about students or whether or not students are learning, how would you go about explaining that to a member of the community? What would you say? This is not a question for the superintendent.
We'll be spending at least 50% of our time during our meetings looking at student growth and progress. Right. I guess that's part of my question to you is what things will eliminate to have this focus on students at the heart of our meetings.
So that's for you to answer. And so my request: look at your agenda, and what things could you modify such that you freed up time to actually look at, are students actually learning? What things on your current agenda might you modify? Or if there are things that you might delete outright, but what things are there that you might modify to free up time so that you'd have more to invest? Like the goal here isn't to, let's just have a meeting that lasts twice as long. That's not really the answer here. So the question is, what would you modify on your existing agenda to make time for that? And Michelle, I'm asking you that since it was your question. If anybody else wants to offer some help, feel free to jump in, but that is certainly the question of the moment.
Well, one of the things that I was thinking about was not addressing your question specifically, Michelle, but before we get to 50%, the rubric is, looks at, are you doing at least 25%? That maybe we can set some interim goals ourselves for moving along, and we sort of help train those muscles to work towards getting where we want to be. And as we set those agenda items to include monitoring, then we say, okay, is it minutes, is it time frame? Maybe not eliminating all these things, but maybe it's like, we're gonna have X number of minutes for monitoring, so we need less than that for the other stuff, and then sort of set some time. That might be one way to go about getting started.
Yeah, so to Debbie's point, part of your process for getting there is you're gonna have to come up with a plan, and then you're gonna have to work the plan, and that plan's probably gonna take a while. So on the timeline that was shared with you all, that you all signed off on back in October, the expectation is that over the next 12 months that you slowly get there, that this is not something that you magically arrive at next month. You could if you chose to. I suspect you will not, in fact, choose to do so. And so the expectation in the timeline is that you'll actually get there ideally by your quarterly self-evaluation in November of this year. So this is not expected to be something quick and easy, but something that you all are deliberate, intentional in taking your time and accomplishing. But on that very same timeline, it is expecting that during the month of March that you're spending at least 10% of your board meeting monitoring progress, and then that percentage just slowly cranks up every so often over the rest of the year until you get to November, where ideally before or by then you've made adjustments to your adult behaviors to be more focused on student outcomes.
I do think tonight there were conversations about, for example, during the COVID reporting, and they kind of crossed over into what some of our guardrails are and how we hold the superintendent accountable. Excuse me, walking around you. But I think that, we could flip some of that conversation that we had about what the guardrail setting and the guardrail monitoring around some of the conversation we had tonight. There's just different ways of thinking about how we shift our language.
No, so let me push back and just be much more blunt about this. This evening, you all shot from the hip. If you're going to be planning full about how you spend your time, shooting from the hip is not going to work for you. So you can do that, but you can't do that and accomplish the type of focus that you intend. And so you indeed, engage in a conversation that is very timely because you received communication that was very timely, but that was in fact not identified on your agenda to have the conversation, and included a speaker who is not identified in your course of agenda to have included. I appreciate your observation earlier that it creates a curious precedent, and that does this mean anyone who sends a letter automatically gets spontaneously added to the agenda in the future? But in addition to creating that precedent, you all diverged from what you communicated to the community that you would be spending your time on. You can, there to a limited degree, you can probably do that and still comply with state law, though some might question the extent to which that complies with the expectation to have conversations that follow posted agendas. But what you certainly won't find yourselves able to do is shoot from the hip and honor a 50% focus. Like you won't be able to do both. You'll have to, and so that doesn't mean you don't have the conversation you had this evening. It just means you'd have to plan for it. Not kind of spontaneously pull people out of the other room when you haven't communicated in advance that's what you would be inviting them into. And so that's that. I just want to be clear: the behavior this evening, the conversations aren't particularly problematic. The way you went about entering into them will not help you accomplish the 50% focus that you've described. Other questions? Yeah.
I have a question on that. So, for example, I guess I don't know if this would fall into it, but the superintendent may not propose major decisions to the board without first engaging students, parents, community, and staff. Although nothing, well, and then limitation 4, the superintendent may neither cause nor allow district circumstances for blah, 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 unsafe, undignified, disrespectful, or unnecessarily intrusive. So those two limitations, if we were to have a conversation about, let's say, those two limitations, what would be your recommendation about like monitoring that in the context of we've received a number of emails that the superintendent isn't doing it?
Yeah. So first, a piece of clarification. What you just described is probably never going to be an example of monitoring. So monitoring is intended to be an intentional activity where you've said in advance, at this point in time, we're going to look at this data and we're going to figure out, are we getting it done for children or not? And so that's the critical part that I'm highlighting there, is that you've predetermined a point in time where you're going to look at something. And so spontaneously saying we want to look at something doesn't actually match what I would describe as monitoring. Like if, yeah, I just imagine, if my, boss wanted to see my performance, if they were trying to monitor an area where I'm growing, if we never discussed what that would look like, they just randomly showed up, for a random amount of time, didn't look at any data, didn't have any intentionality around it, and then randomly left without taking any action or providing any meaningful feedback, like that wouldn't feel like really good. That wouldn't feel supportive to me as an employee. Um, and so I wouldn't describe that type of behavior as monitoring. I would describe that type of behavior as what you all did this evening. And so I would just distinguish, you have the right to behave that way. I'm not suggesting you don't. I'm saying that would not meet my definition of monitoring. And so your question is, how would we monitor? Well, what you do is, for those particular policies, you'd put them on a calendar and you'd say, in this month, we're going to look at this, and in this month, we're going to look at this, and in this month, we're going to look at this. What that does mean is it precludes, the process of monitoring precludes kind of randomly bringing things up at the last minute. It obligates you to just be thoughtful and planful about what information do we want to know, and communicate that in advance, and expect your superintendent to show up with data. So for example, one thing you didn't get this evening, in that entire conversation, you received no meaningful data from your superintendent regarding his compliance with either of the policies you just stated. None whatsoever. So you have no better clue right now whether your superintendent is compliant with the board's expectations or not. That's what happens when you shoot from the hip, and that's why I distinguish it from monitoring, is that you had a conversation, but I don't know what you accomplished. If I'm one of your teachers, did anything meaningful happen, or did a bunch of people just talk about something, but like you all didn't vote? You didn't hold the superintendent accountable for bringing you data. And so that's why I just want to distinguish. Having random conversations, you have every right to do that. But just don't confuse that with, this is an act of us monitoring the vision and values of the community to ensure whether or not the superintendent is compliant with that. That did not happen this evening. You just had a random conversation. And so you can have a monitoring conversation around those issues. And that letter you received can be part of the kind of the evidence submitted for that monitoring. You just have to plan for that. And as part of that planning, your superintendent, would have to bring his evidence as well, as here's the evidence that, I have or have not honored the expectations of the community, as described to me by the board's policy.
So if I may, the first question was, what would we take off
Yeah.
the agenda? So if we're talking about not shooting from the hip and not having random conversations, is that what our open dialogue is?
So your open dialogue is something different. You're talking about when opportunities for the community to speak?
No. I mean, open dialogue is a space that we have within our board work on the agenda to bring up stuff.
Oh, yeah. So if you all, I think it's valuable for board members to have a way to surface items for future agendas. I don't know that you need to take up board time with that. I don't see what value is created by spending board time that in terms of for you as a governing team. For individual board members, it probably helps you look good for constituents. But in terms of helping the governing team govern, I don't see a benefit to that versus an email to the board chair that says, here is an issue that I would like to submit for consideration in a future board meeting. So whether you do that via email, which takes 0 time in a board meeting, or by creating an opportunity to discuss it, proposed agenda items at board meetings, you could do either. But I think they are of equal value and to the governing team. One of them is of greater value to individual board members, creating a space to do it at a board meeting. But they are of equal value to the governing team. But one of them also takes significantly less board meeting time. And so those are the types of balancing acts that you're going to have to sort through. Are we willing to deprive us as individuals of benefits that we're used to enjoying to free up time to have more conversations about student learning? And that's going to be a tough conversation and a tough debate every single time. That conversation is never going to get easy. But you all didn't sign up for easy. You signed up to serve children.
Kyla, you can expect an email from me then about an item that I would, maybe I think would be worthwhile to put on the agenda and talk about.
I think that's absolutely.
Well, and so let me lean into that. So you all just passed a set of results and limitations policies, essentially saying here's the community's highest priority vision, what we want our students to know and be able to do. And here's our community's highest priority values that have to be honored. These are non-negotiables. The superintendent doesn't get to pick and choose. These have to be done. So you all have identified the community's vision. You've codified those as your results policies. And the community's values, you've codified those as your limitations policies. So now, when we say board work, what is board work? Then I would identify for you 3 criteria for whether or not something is board work. And if it meets these 3 criteria, it should automatically go on a board meeting agenda. And if it doesn't meet any of these 3 criteria, it should automatically not go on a board meeting agenda. And maybe you discuss whether or not you add it on. But if it meets these criteria, it should be an automatic yes. If it doesn't meet any of these 3 criteria, the default answer should be no. And then you should have some process for deciding if we're going to, add it anyway. And so those 3 criteria, is it directly related to one of your results policies? And when I say directly, I mean literally described in the language of your results policies. So one of your results is about early literacy. And somebody may say, well, nutrition, during, child, during gestation, has some correlation to the likelihood that students will be able to read on time. Great. I would say that absolutely influences literacy. I would not say that is in any way named in the language of your result policy. And so if people want to talk about gestational health, they can do that. I just wouldn't do it at a board meeting because it influences one of your results, but it's not directly related to it. It's not directly named in the language of your result. So the 3 criteria I'd use for, is it board work or not? Is it directly related to the, mentioned in the language of your result, directly related, mentioned in the language of your limitations, or is it legally required? If it meets one of those 3 criteria, then I'd say automatically, yeah, it should probably go on the board's agenda. If it doesn't meet any of those 3 criteria, I would by default not put it on the board's agenda. And then if you still want to have a conversation about whether or not we should put it on the agenda, even though it doesn't meet any of those 3. But the default answer, if it doesn't meet any of those 3, I would tell you should be no. And then let's think about whether or not we want to violate that. So that's how I would encourage you, now that you've adopted those policies, that's how I would encourage you to use them to help you focus your energy on the things that you all say matter most. Because if they actually are what you say matter most, then you have to prove that through your actions, not your words. Your words, not worth a lot. Your actions will demonstrate kind of where your true values lie. What are the things that you're truly committed to? So the question there, Debbie, is this item that I really, really want to talk about, does it meet one of those 3 criteria? If it doesn't, then I would suggest that the default answer should be no. but then you should have some conversation with your board chairs to whether we should do it anyway, even though the default answer, even though it's not one of these three things.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
We can also.
Anyone questions about that as a criteria for board work? And things going on the agenda, if it meets one of those three criteria, automatically. If it doesn't, then default no, and then let's talk about it if we still want to persist. Any questions about that as a criteria for how to determine what to add to your agenda or not? Again, so go ahead and apply that criteria to your current agenda and see if that gives you any insights into things that might be removed or modified. And so that's just another way, Nichelle, getting at your earlier question. Use those three criteria, and that might help you all in thinking through how do we more quickly get to the point where we are investing a significant amount of time and actually figuring out, are we serving children, not just how are we deploying the resources, both human and financial, of the school system. Other questions or comments on this idea of progress monitoring before we shift gears into your self-evaluation? Other questions or comments about progress monitoring and this idea of investing at least half of our time into monitoring our results each month, and the other half into monitoring limitations and voting and any other legal requirements we have. Any other questions about progress monitoring? All right, well, in that case, let's shift to your quarterly self-evaluation. So this is a fun time. We did this evaluation, this exact same evaluation, this exact same instrument a number of months ago. Does anybody remember kind of what the consensus score was last time? It's somewhere between 0 and 100 points. Anybody remember?
0.
Oh, yeah. All right, so what we get to do now is we get to dive back in using the exact same instrument and identify where's the board now. So now, Claudia, if you could go ahead and put that back up. What we'll do is we'll just go page by page, and what I want each of you individually to do is read the first page of this instrument and determine for yourself which column do we think most describes the board's current performance. And so the way this works is you look at the first column, and if nothing there is true, then you move on to the second column, approaching. And if everything there is true, then you move on to the third column, meeting. And if everything there is true, then you see if everything in mastering focus is true. So that is the way this instrument works. If you're missing anything, that's fine. Note it, make a note of it, because then we'll talk about, okay, got it. So that's what we need to work on over the next 3 months. So try to identify first which column is the board in right now today, and then try to identify what is 1 or 2 key things that the board needs to do over the next 3 months in order to make this movement to the next column or to 2 columns over. So take just a moment, read through this, and then we'll check in. This is page 1 of the instrument. This is vision and results. The board will, in collaboration, adopt results policies that are student outcomes focused. This is all about the results policies that you just adopted. Which column are we in? All right, for this one, let's start with Vicky. Vicky, which column represents the board's performance right now?
If I understand correctly, that you have to complete each piece in the column, right? Before you move.
Mm-hmm.
We've completed the not student outcome, the first one, but we're not
Yep.
on the second one.
What about the second column? Have you not yet completed?
Well, the board has adopted no fewer than one and no more than 5 goals. I think we've adopted more than 5.
Nope. Your results policies, you only adopted 4.
Results, okay, just results. I don't think we have publicly posted them. The last point there.
Oh, yeah. Well, so that's a good question. Do your draft results, and draft limitations policies show up on your website somewhere? Obviously, they are in board docs, but are they anywhere else? Did you all make them available for folks to look at or comment on?
Now that we've voted, they will be posted.
Got it.
That's not done right now. So that would leave us at 0, wouldn't it? I think.
All right. So that's Vicky's perspective is you've knocked out everything in not student outcomes focus, but you're still working on stuff and approaching focus. So that still leaves you at the first column. Anybody else? That's Vicky's analysis. Anybody else have a different analysis?
I guess I have a question about that. If we have completed everything from the not student outcomes focus column and worked on several of the approaching student outcomes, we're not at 10? Because then
So you would only be so the meeting student outcomes focus on this awards 25 points. You would only earn that if everything in the first column is false and everything in the second and third column was true. If everything was where it needed to be except for one thing in the meeting student outcomes focus column, then that would leave you at approaching student outcomes focus. Everything in the column has to be true in order to fully advance.
So we're 10. Oh no, we'd be 0 then?
It sounds like you are applying a similar self-evaluation as Vicky.
No, I put us at 10, but yeah, we're student outcomes, but I don't know, it's late.
Anyone else have a different analysis? We've heard one analysis. Anyone else have a different analysis? A different evaluation?
Well,
all right. Yeah, go for it.
Says we need the interim goals, not just goals, not just the results, but interim goals. Those aren't the same as.
You should probably be reading off of the screen. The one on the screen is the one that was created specifically for you all. And I'll make sure to email it out and get it emailed back out to you again.
Well, I guess, let me ask a quick question. The board publicly posted the results and progress measures for public comment prior to adoption. We did post, they are posted because we had to get feedback, which is.
I believe that was the case. That's why I asked earlier.
Yeah, so we didn't meet that.
I would agree. That was, I specifically remember seeing that myself. Anyone else have an idea of a different result than what Vicky's described? All right. So I also would suggest that really the only thing that you're missing is the progress measures haven't been completely nailed down. They're like 95% nailed down. So I suspect this time next month, the answer to all of that will be yes. And so let's imagine that those are already in hand, that the progress measures, because you've already seen them, but we're just 95% there. We're not 100% there. But let's imagine that's handled. because really that will be by the next time we have this conversation, if we were to have the conversation next month. So assuming that was handled, then where would you all be?
We'd be at meeting student outcomes.
Yeah, I'd say just like the first of meeting student outcomes. Everything, just the board's goals are to all pertain to desired student outcomes, and then anything below that, I'd say are not there yet.
Well, I retract what I said. I think we'd be at mastering.
Repeat that question, AJ.
Imagine that your progress measures, you've already received a copy of those this evening, that are in draft form. They're pretty much, I would say, like 95% there. With a few tweaks, they'll be there. I'll work with your team and we'll get those out to you all before your next board meeting. So let's imagine that that's completely knocked out, that the progress measures are in fact complete and in place. If that was true, then, because that was the issue that Vicky brought up. So if that was true, then where would you all be?
Then we're in the green and meeting student outcomes focus.
Okay, what are you missing such that you're only at meeting and not at mastering?
I guess we're at least there. Let me get there.
And so for that to be true, that would suggest that you all have done everything in meeting, but not yet everything in mastering.
The measure of the ending points?
Yeah. So that is one challenge, is that's when I said your progress measures are like 95% there, that's the 5% that they're missing. And so that's not yet in place. That's correct. Anything else that you all are missing that's preventing you from being at master's focus? Anything else you all are missing that's besides progress measures that's preventing you from being master's focus?
The student's assessment needs, we haven't completed that yet.
Which descriptor are you reading?
The master student, the very end.
Which one, the first, second, or third?
Third.
Could you read that for me?
The board relied on root cause analysis, comprehensive student needs assessments, and also similar research-based tools to inform identification and prioritization of potential goals.
So you're saying that you all did not receive an analysis of that nature?
Right, exactly. That I'm aware of at this time.
Got it. Anybody else? Thoughts on that?
Would that be specific root cause analysis, or would that be the general, or could that be addressed by the general root causes that we get during your UIP process?
Good question. Rico, you want to jump into this one?
I believe the UIP would meet the terms of this paragraph.
That is exactly as I saw it as well. And that information was made available to you all as part of the result policy development process. So I would actually say that you all have met that. You may not remember going over that data, but I remember walking you through it. You all have been bombarded with a lot of information since then, so it doesn't surprise me that that wasn't the most memorable moment of your lives, but we did in fact go over some of that data with you as part of this process. Anything else that you all are missing from this first page? This is by far the most important page. That's the only reason we're spending so much time on it. Anything else that you're missing on this page that's preventing you from being at master's focus? All right. So in point of fact, I'm actually with Vicky. I think you grade very well, which is to say you're a tough grader. But I think you're factually accurate that as soon as the progress measures get shorted out, I think you all rapidly move, from not student outcomes focused in the moment, just because that's not sorted out yet, to meeting or potentially master's focus. And so this is one of those ones that's going to, go from, 0 all the way up very rapidly. I suspect by this time next month, all of that'll be ironed out, and you'll be at minimum at meets focus. Any other questions about this first page of your self-evaluation? Questions or comments about this first page? All right, let's go to page 2. That was the toughest one. The rest of them are a lot easier, a lot quicker. So page 2 is values and limitations. The board will, in collaboration, adopt limitations policies aligned with the results. Take a moment to look at this and identify where do you think you are today, and if you're not already at mastering focus, kind of what are you missing that would get you there? And I would say the same thing with the progress measures. Just understand that the progress measures aren't there yet, but those will be along shortly. So we already know about that. Other than the progress measures, is there anything else you're missing that's holding you back from being at master's focus on page 2, values and limitations?
You have 6 guardrails instead of 5.
Yes. I was unable to narrow what you had down below 6, and then you all were undesirous of narrowing it down to 5. And so that is kind of the situation. It makes it a little bit harder to focus. The more kind of priorities that you take on, the less focus you can apply to any one of them. And so that does ding your focus a little bit. So let's imagine that you were at 5, then what else? So let's imagine that you were at 5 instead of 6, and let's imagine that your progress measures in place. Anything else holding you all back from being at master's focus?
What about the theories of action under meeting student outcomes?
Yeah. So there's this idea that boards may choose to adopt a theory of action, kind of this high level strategic limitation that is not um, not absolutely required. It may not make sense for you, so that's for you all to decide. But that is a form of limitation policy that people sometimes adopt. That being said, that is something that you all didn't opt for, so it is not actually on the document that's on the screen, which is why I once again recommend that you all are looking at the document on the screen, which has been adapted to you all, as opposed to the paper version you have, which is not adapted to you all. Anything else other than kind of the number and other than the progress measures? Anything else holding you back from being at master's focus? All right, Stephanie, how would you score you all for this one? Hello? Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Stephanie, how would you score the board for this one? Would you like to phone a friend?
No, not necessarily.
All right. How would you score the board on this page of the rubric?
I would give us a 15.
All right. Got it. Master's focus. Anyone else have a different evaluation?
Yeah, 0.
That is substantially different. Why 0?
Well, if we go with what you said before, I initially had us at 5, but apparently because there's one item in the approaching student outcomes that we did not meet, which is the board has adopted no fewer than 1 and no more than 5 limitations. We have 6, then we can't claim the 5, so we're 0.
All right. If that was not the case, where would you be?
Oh.
I'd say I'd probably put us at meeting.
Yeah, I think this one is a lot like the first page, is that you've got just a little bit more work to do, primarily with your progress measures. Yeah, I would, for you all's purposes, I would largely ignore the 5 since I don't see you all going down to 5. So I'd largely ignore that one. But what you can't ignore is that you need ways of measuring progress. And so the biggest thing that you're missing here is your progress measures. And so as soon as, again, that finishes getting knocked out, and I'll work with your staff, again, they are right at the cusp. So you should have copies of that available for you well before your next board meeting. Then I think, yeah, you'll be in a really good shape with this one. But I tend to agree that right now you're just at the starting point, because you've just now adopted your results and limitations. But very soon you'll have your progress measures and you'll all be off and running. All right, so that's 2 pages down. What's the next one? All right, so let's scroll to the next page, to monitoring and accountability. Claudia, could you scroll us up a page? Monitoring and accountability. The board will devote significant time monthly to monitoring progress toward the results. So take a moment and read through this one and try to identify where do you think you would be and kind of what are some critical next steps. Where are you right now and what are some critical next steps? So this one gets a little bit more complicated. This is where we start talking about monitoring progress. We get distinction about what is board work, and having a monitoring calendar. Since this one is harder, Kevin, we're coming to you. Where would you put the board on this one?
I'm thinking we're almost complete on the approaching. Not gonna focus because we're not to the 10% of the investing no less than 10% of the board authorized public meetings monitoring its goals and goals.
Yeah, the expectation is that if we had this exact same conversation this time next month, the answer would just be yes, you'd already be there. Anything else?
Would we already be there if the district, like the ending points, is still kind of in flux?
Those are, but that's, that goes hand in hand with the progress measures. It's almost there. You'll have it shortly.
Okay.
Anything else? So Kevin, what was your final verdict?
I would say approaching. I would say 10 points because like we're not outside of it yet, but we've met we're outside of the not outcomes focused.
Got it. Anybody come up with a different evaluation?
Well, I think I'd still say 0. We don't have a monitoring calendar yet.
Nope, we will bring that to you for next month's board agenda. So Claudia, you can add that on to the things under board work that the board will need to look at, because once we have all the progress measures, then the superintendent will also draft up a draft monitoring calendar. So we'll be able to go over that next month. So we'll get that knocked out. Anything else?
Obviously, from what we talked about tonight, we did not invest no less than 10% of our time monitoring.
Not yet, but this is a growth mindset. We have not yet done so, but I think next month we can practice. We should be able to do our first practice monitoring session, and I suspect it'll take up at least 10% of the board's time for the month. And so this time next month, I think you'll be able to say yes to that. Anything else the folks are noticing that you need in order to proceed on this one? You've got progress measures, those are coming online. We already have a plan for that. Got a monitoring calendar, that's about to come online. We've got a plan for that. And investing at least 10% of the board's time in monitoring. We have a plan to do our first practice session next month, but that'll cover that. And I suspect it'll take at least 10% of the board's time for the month. Anything else that needs to be addressed on this page in order to really set the board up to run? Somebody want to read the last descriptor under approaching?
The superintendent is evaluated only on performance regarding the board's goals, guardrails, and interim goals, guardrails. The board
Are you reading the one on the screen?
Oh,
the one on the cut off, the last one.
Claudia, could you scroll up just a little bit so I can see somehow that got cut off? So you can see the bottom half that's on the next page, on your screen shows up on the next page. There you go.
superintendent is evaluated only on performance regarding the board's result update. Board considers superintendent performance to be distinguishable.
What does that mean? Anybody? What does that mean?
The district performance is Rico's job.
Yeah, that's exactly what it means. The district performance is his job. And so if things are improving, that means he's doing his job. If things are not improving, that means he's not doing his job. It's really kind of black and white that way. Any other questions or comments about that?
I just want to say, see if it's reflected here in this one. Yeah, in the green column.
Yeah.
The board has been provided copies of, but unless required by law, did not vote to approve/disapprove the superintendent's plans for implementing the board's results and work to ensure that the plan included both an implementation timeline and implementation instruments. I foresee members of the board being uncomfortable with that.
Oh yeah, say more.
I know my board.
I know, but why uncomfortable? Say more about it.
You know, I foresee pushback from some vocal members of the community as well. Just saying that we're not voting to approve. You know, Director Ivy mentioned some of that, talking about wanting to be able to have more input in certain situations, and I could see people being uncomfortable saying I didn't vote unless I was legally required to on said subject.
On implementation plans. So what's an example of one of the superintendents? What's an example? So do you all have a technology plan?
Sure.
Rico, does the district have a technology plan?
CTO,
yes.
Did the board approve the technology plan? Okay. So Kevin, why didn't the board approve the technology plan?
We weren't paying attention. No, I'm joking. Just it wasn't part of our purview. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Like,
So
put it like this: we look at it and think about it. So we need to have this conversation because when I read that,
yeah.
You know, it just kind of feels different.
So the question is, do you want to evaluate your superintendent based on what they plan to do or based on what they actually did?
You're correct on that. I want to actually just look at our actual numbers for our district.
And so that's the intentionality here, is not to deprive the board of information about what's actually happening. The intentionality is, however, to say that the board never wants to give the superintendent the idea that just because you came up with a plan that you have done your job. Like, coming up with plans is not accomplishing your job. Actually improving results for children is what it is to do your job. And so that's the intention here, is to distinguish between those two. Is essentially to say to the board, don't give the superintendent pats on the back because he could write something on a piece of paper. Pats on the back only get rewarded when you accomplish the community's vision, your results, and when you abide by the community's values, your limitations. If you do those things, then we have reason to keep you around. If you aren't doing those things, then we start to have really uncomfortable conversations. But what we don't do is get really excited because you wrote pretty words. So that's the intention of this. But is the intention to say that the board, does not, is unknowledgeable or uninformed about the implementation? No. But is the board, is the board wanting to in any way signal that having a plan is synonymous with having done your job? No, the board does not want to signal that at all. And that's what this is talking about. But who else? Anybody else have thoughts on this? Please share. Well, that was a quick conversation. All right. Well, I agree with the assessment that the board does not yet have a monitoring calendar, but that, again, by this time next month, the board will. And so this is yet another example. The monitoring and accountability page is another example where we're just getting started because we're just starting off in this work. That's why I've been insistent all this time that getting your results and limitations is not the end of your work. It is literally the very beginning of the work. And so hopefully you're now seeing that just having adopted those this evening means that you're basically at zero across the board, only because you're just now starting. And so now everything in this instrument is about how are we using the results and limitations? Not do we have them, but how are we using them? And what result are we getting from having used them? In the same way that you don't want to pat your superintendent on the back for having a plan, what you really want to know is how did you use it? What result did you get? And so this rubric, which may seem a little bit harsh, you think all of thinking I'd like to have a really big score, but right now I don't. But this is culture setting. You don't want to give the impression to your superintendent that you score points just by having started work. You want to give the superintendent the impression that you score points by having actually completed it, by actually getting something done for children. Well, that same applies to the board. Very quickly, you all are going to be knocking out of the park on this. But right now, you're literally just getting started by adopting your results and limitations this evening. Any other questions about this section, monitoring and accountability? Other questions about this section? All right, that takes us to communication and collaboration. The board will lead transparently and include stakeholders in the pursuit of the results. The board will lead transparency and include stakeholders in the pursuit of the results. Go ahead and read over this right quick and let us know where you are at. All right, Debbie, you're up.
0. We are,
Why 0?
well, we're working on one. I really can't read this. I'm good enough to read this. But in terms of tracking our use of time in board meetings, result setting, that's going to happen fairly soon.
What's one significant thing that the board needs to do in order to progress on this page? I can barely hear you. What'd you say?
She was telling me that I can use this like a touch screen. How about that? I've been sitting here for 3 hours. Okay. I'm sorry. Well, this is not the same. That's what you guys were.
So if you're speaking, I can barely hear you. So Debbie, what's one significant thing on here that the board needs to needs to accomplish next in order to progress?
Well, we've got our results, our limitations set, now we need to
Anybody else have a different result, a different evaluation?
We need to adopt the monitoring calendar.
Yeah. Anyone else? Well, anything significant on here that the board needs to attend to next in order to progress? Just to verify, how far in advance of the board meeting do you all now receive your materials?
14 days.
14 days?
Yeah.
And are you all able to submit questions and get them answered before the board meeting? Just by a quick show of hands, how many people have taken advantage of that and submitted questions before and got them answered before a board meeting? All right, so we got a few folks. I would strongly encourage upgrade your usage of that policy. The more you ask questions in advance, the more transparent you make the Q&A process, because that is a document that gets attached to this agenda so the community can see all the questions and see all the answers. That makes it far easier for community members to track the conversation than having to sit down and watch this entire video meeting all over again. So the more you can put questions and answers in that Q&A document, the easier, more transparent you make this whole process for your community members. I strongly encourage, use it. You do not want the only way for community members to know what the conversation was to watch, a 4-hour video. You want them to be able to easily see, here are the types of concerns that board members raised. Here were the answers that the administration offered, in advance of the board voting in whatever way it voted. The more you use that document, the more transparent this whole process becomes for your community. Anything else on here that folks want to lift up? All right, and then let's go to unity and trust. 2 more pages.
I have a question about the two-way communication, but I guess
Yes.
we solved that earlier and just addressing that we're going to have a town hall and we'll have that two-way communication and that'll meet that goal.
So this evening you showed an example of one-way communication and you showed an example of two-way communication. When did you all demonstrate an example of two-way communication?
With Bruce?
Yeah, so that was an example of two-way communication. I'm not opposed to one-way communication. I'm not suggesting you don't do that. I'm just saying that does not meet the definition of community engagement. You have not engaged with your community when they have talked to you and then received no response whatsoever from you. And so keep doing that. I think that's fine. But don't ever mistake that for you having had a meaningful dialogue, a meaningful engagement with your community. For that, you're going to need something else. And so what I'll be recommending to you all is that we build out as part of your monitoring calendar, that we include in that specific dates and for when throughout the year that you all will be leading community sessions with the community for a variety of different purposes. But as we build out a monitoring calendar, we will include a column that has those on it, so that you all are just having with regularity, that you all are having conversations with the community about the work of the board. That is distinct from having ongoing conversations about operational matters. The expectation is that your superintendent needs to be doing that. And so if folks are concerned about how come the snow wasn't shoveled quickly enough, you're not going to have a town hall for that. if folks are concerned about, why aren't the third graders learning to read? Why aren't we seeing improvements? You might, in fact, have a conversation about that. And so the key thing here is having conversation with the community about things that you have defined as board work, largely things that are directly in the language of your results and limitations. For your operational things, what your limitation policy describes is an expectation that the superintendent is having those type of conversations around operational issues. And so we'll be building those in so that you will have more time for meaningful two-way interaction with your community, around, work that the board is leading. Let's see, on unity and trust. Unity and trust. All right, I think, Nichelle, you're up. I haven't picked on you yet, have I? All right, so how would you score the board for unity and trust?
I'd say we're approaching.
Why approaching?
So attendance at all board meetings. So we got the attendance, the first thing we're doing. We're also doing the second, has adopted a policy information to one board member is provided to all board members. We've been doing that, and we have a formal policy about. Though this third one is where I think we're not quite there. The board reviews governing board operating procedures at least once during every length of time equal to a board member's term of office. If we're doing it, I can't think of it. Good.
We did with what was that group before?
Yeah, I thought you all did.
Oh, with
Yeah,
the Aspen group?
I thought you all did so. Yeah,
Okay.
I thought you all did that.
Aspen group, yeah. So then, if we've done those, then we're actually in meeting student outcomes. No, we have a policy and language around ethics and conflicts, but I don't know if like this board, every individual in this room has, collectively visited that statement and added language. So I'd say we're meeting student outcomes focus.
All right. Anybody have a different evaluation?
I agree with Nichelle, except for the language that we have in our ethics and conflicts of interest statement. We sign it at the beginning of our term, and it does not mention the outcomes of all students. That members recuse themselves from matters involving individuals or organizations who made campaign contributions to them or who appointed them.
That last one too, where we haven't done unanimously agreed during the most recent quarterly self-evaluation that all board. Can you scroll down, please, Claudia? Members have honored 3. I don't think we're doing that last one either.
So, so right now is actually the time to do so. So does the board feel like all board members have over the previous quarter adhered to these ethical boundaries? Is there anyone who feels like the board has not adhered to these ethical boundaries? All right, so it sounds unanimous that you all agree that all 7 of you have adhered to these ethical boundaries. Then there you go.
You're gonna say something. Oh, sorry. I thought you were saying you were gonna say something. Oh.
Are there any board members who, so the other question here is, the board members agree that all board members have adhered to your governance procedures. So are there any board members who are concerned that that you, yourself, or other board members have not adhered to the board's operating procedures? Are there any concerns that you or another colleague has violated any of the board's operating procedures? All right, well, there you go. So you all are, meet ethical and operational expectations. Congratulations. Um, Any other questions on this one, or anyone else have a different evaluation on this one? All right, and then that takes us to the last one, continuous improvement. Just really looking at this to which the board will invest time and resources toward improving its focus on the results. How would you score yourself on the last one?
Does this count as our self-evaluation?
This is your self-evaluation, that's correct. And I'll come to the board chair for this one. How would you score your, since board chair, largely hold board chairs accountable for ensuring the continuous improvement of the board. How would you score the board for this one?
I'm kind of stuck at 0 because
Why is that?
we haven't voted to adopt the results of the self-evaluation.
I'd give you credit for that one. You all reached consensus on the last one, just like we're about to reach consensus on this one.
Claudia, can you scroll up a little bit? We have not tracked the average annual cost of staff time invested in governance.
Yeah, so usually once per year during your annual self-evaluation, you'll stop and try to figure out kind of what is the impact we're having as a governing team from a budgetary perspective on staff time. So when it comes time to do your superintendent evaluation, right before you do your superintendent evaluation, you'll conduct your annual evaluation for yourselves. It's actually the first descriptor at the top of meetings focus. Is the most recent board annual self-evaluation took place no more than 45 days before the most recent superintendent evaluation. Out of curiosity, why would a board behave this way?
If you're asking me, it's important to reflect on, to me, I think it's important to reflect on yourself and the job that you're doing, and in order to hold someone else accountable.
Yeah. All right, so ultimately, how would you score yourself for this page, Madam Chair?
Well, I'm still at 0.
All right, what significant things will you all need to do to progress You'll have to, kind of keep track of how we're using our time. That's how you will help grow from 0% to 50%. That's what that's all about. Like if you don't track it, then you probably won't get better at it. What gets measured gets done. Anything else?
And providing time during our meetings to recognize the accomplishments of students and staff regarding the progress toward results and result progress measures.
Yeah, very important to praise the people who are on the front lines of the work, your staff as well as your students. As they are demonstrating progress on the very things that the community has identified are the most important things to be progressing on. Really important act of leadership is to lift that up and let people know this is the stuff that we want to see happening for our students.
Yeah, Rico, you got those mugs from recognizing excellence. You can FedEx them.
I think also another thing that we could do is create certificates maybe from the board. I don't know if that would be a possibility.
All right, so when you add it all up, so now that we're kind of formally setting our baseline now that we're starting this work. So this is where we're starting from now that we are officially underway. When you add it all up, what score do you all give yourselves for this, essentially this very first quarter of starting this work? I'll give you a hint, it'll be somewhere between 0 and 100.
I think the only area was monitoring. Are you giving us credit for the hypothetical if we had the progress measures?
Absolutely not.
Okay, well then we're 0.
I wouldn't say 0. At least that's not what I got.
Yeah, we had some points in.
Oh, no. Because you pointed out that you don't have the progress measures yet. You're correct. Yes, 0. So realistically speaking, this time next month, I think you'll be like in the 60s, possibly 70s, just because you've done so much work. But until you get your progress measures in place, it's just hard to do anything because that's so critical to how you invest your time going forward. So I suspect you'll bounce from the floor all the way up to in the 60s or 70s this time next month. So when we do this again in 3 months, you will be very, very, very far down the road. Any questions, comments, or dissension regarding your quarterly self-evaluation? Well, then I'll accept that as a consensus of the board on the completion of your quarterly self-evaluation. We'll do this again in 3 months and see just how fast you all have moved. I think everybody's going to be impressed with all the hard work you've accomplished. Madam Chair, back to you.
Thank you for your time and your effort working us through that process. And with that being said, we are now onto the policy perception checklist, and I think everyone will agree that we've received some information tonight that may require a policy change and additional information and obviously monitoring per our new results and limitations. So yes to both questions. And we are now onto open dialogue. Any announcements, observations of the board, or anything that you'd like to mention this evening, Director Gerken?
Out and about. You'll want to get me your articles for that, your paragraph for that by February 26th, so you have 2 weeks.
Haven't quite been out.
I know, or about.
Yeah. But I am excited for the retirement ceremony and the videos that we've committed to submitting. So, anything else?
I am cleaning out emails and just noticing NSBA that.
Uh-huh.
Is coming up, us newer members haven't been able to go obviously in person, but now it's virtual. Is that something we all do together, or just kind of like CASB, just whoever wants to individually? I guess just getting temperature, and it's like the second week of April, it says, so.
It's virtual, right?
Yes.
I know that last year and the year prior, board members, if they wanted to go, you could go. And it was in person. Obviously, this time virtual. I mean, you can definitely go if you want to, or whatever you want to. I don't know if it was that conference or another conference that we brought back, Marcus and I believe, brought back a presentation about what we learned. So that's definitely something that we could also do too. It was cute. Yeah.
So report back, Director Ortiz.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, CASB was a little hard to sit through, but, it's still good learning, and when you're still getting your feet wet, even though it's been a year,
Yeah.
all those opportunities are good.
Yeah. They
All
do
right.
have some really great sessions. I would encourage you to take advantage of it.
All right.
The other thing, I'm glad you brought that up, was the Harvard leadership. I believe I'm not going to say the name right. But we talked about as a board either attending virtually this year or in person next year. And obviously for those of us who won't be on the board next year, some of us said we wanted to do virtual, some others said in person. So I think for the district's sake and for sanity's sake, just maybe the board come December, decide whether or not you want to do in person, and that we forego the virtual conference this year. Is that okay?
Fine by me.
I know you guys haven't, I don't know if you signed us up yet, but.
No, we just indicated that there might be an interest, and then they were supposed to be getting back to us with whatever those details might be, so.
Okay. Is that okay with this board? Great. Anything else?
I'm curious about the legality in Aurora for school board members to be compensated. I'm not worrying about it for myself during this tenure, but moving forward, for the sake of not being a financial hardship on potential candidates. I heard that there may have been some sort of reason why it's not legal. They had to pass something legislatively. I don't know exactly what the details are, but I would love to hear from Brandon as to if that's a discussion that we can have here, or do we need to wait until there's some sort of thing that's passed? I think Mr. Woodrow was working on that already. Do you have some info on that, Rico?
I know there's a bill that's being talked about this year in the legislature, so I assume that it's prohibited by statute, and there's a bill to consider that as an option, but I don't know the particular legislative issue.
If there's an opportunity to advocate for that, I'd be glad to speak on that behalf. Just let me know if you know of anything going on with that, or who I should talk to. So I probably know them.
You'll get your first legislative update probably next week, and if it's introduced, it will be in there.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay. With that being said, again, we are in receipt of the correspondence of the letter to the board from the AEA Board of Directors. Our next meeting date is March 13th, which is our retreat, and then we will have our regular board meeting on March 23rd. However, we will be adding a meeting for the first Tuesday of March to do the town hall. So any ideas or thoughts on town hall, please get those to Claudia and myself. And other than that, I would move for us to be adjourned. Any objections?
Can I just add one thing? Sorry, real quick. Since we're talking about the town halls, and we're talking about youth and them being engaged and speaking to us, and I also spoke with AJ, and just for thought, would the board consider looking into having a youth board? Which AJ say it's very, he's dealt with them and they're doing really well. So I would ask that we think about that. And it's something they would administer, so it wouldn't be something that we would administer. And I think with the climate the way it is and with the youth and stuff, I thought it'd be a great idea to put in force, just like we're doing the town hall. They meet once a month and it's a youth board and they invite us to their board.
That's a discussion that we've had for the last 3 years, and, I mean, if district leadership can figure out how to make that work with, that is representative of students in our district.
Right.
From all schools, and
We're
we
talking
can
all
add that to the agenda for
Yes.
maybe next meeting, and,
Can I request that be, or do I have to send something?
you can, yeah, either, if, yep, just send an email.
Okay.
Okay,